Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku had Mageddon Quirk Part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see Part 2, comment down below. And let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story Sunnivale from 𝐴3. So let's start the video. The 𝐀𝐦 district in the People's Republic of China was quiet tonight, as it sometimes was. Many of the residents of this district were fast asleep, getting some rest for the busy day ahead of them tomorrow. Be it work, school, or social events that they are doing, everyone was resting, and nothing has gone wrong in the district. That is, until at around 2 a.m., a couple in a small house awoke to the smell of smoke passing by their bedroom window. One of the couples was a middle-aged woman who got out of bed to look out the window, while her husband watched. She looked around, wondering the origins of the smoke. "What can you see? Or smell?" the husband asked from his bed. The woman looked out further from her window, but not too far so she can be dizzy from the smoke. And that was when she saw it. The smoke was from the fire that was coming from a house a few blocks down from her. She realized who the house belonged to. It was her best friend who had a 5-year-old son. Recently, the son had developed his quirk, which might possibly be the cause of the fire from the house. She turned back to her husband, worried. "It's coming from the Zhu residence. I think it's Haley's son." The wife shared her information. Her husband gasped and grabbed his phone on a desk beside the bed. He turned back towards his wife. "I'll call the pro heroes. You go and check to see if Haley and her son have escaped yet." His wife nodded and ran out of the room. Outside, people from different houses began to gather around the house of Haley Zhu and her son, who were not outside, which caused the residents to make a disturbing realization: that the woman and her child were still stuck in the burning house. This realization wasn't made until pro heroes with water-based quirks had arrived, and a young girl shouted out from the crowd of residents that were gathering around the burning house thanks to her quirk, which gave her supersonic hearing. "A mommy and a little boy are trapped inside that house. I can hear the boy crying." She pointed towards the burning building, worried about the residents' safety, as was everyone else in the neighborhood. "Rest assured, we will get them out." A pro hero reassured the neighbors and little girl, just as a few pieces of floorboards were heard collapsing from inside the burning house. The pro heroes quickly got to work in putting out the fire while the neighbors looked on. The pro heroes looked at how bad the fire was. At this rate, Haley and her son might not be able to get out alive. The pro heroes, despite their quirks, were not prepared to enter burning buildings. They just have to hope, but not pray, as the pro heroes that were trying to put out the fire were atheists. "Am I not too late?" The neighborhood felt a small tremor, but that was because he appeared. The little girl noticed the figure and gasped happily. A few neighbors were also surprised as they took out their phones and cameras to record the figure who looked at the burning house. August 5th, 2012, 15:14, 7:10, 15:21, 18:14, 5:25, 25, 7, 9, 14, 19. Inside the burning building, single mother Haley Zhu was busy looking through the burning surroundings of her house, trying to find her son. Just last week his quirk developed, which was around the time children like him get a quirk. But it was the power to shoot fire out of his hands. And he still needed time to control it. But unfortunately, tonight's little use of his quirk caused the entire house to go on fire. "Where are you?" she called out to her son. After a few seconds, Haley looked up to see a piece of the roof falling towards her. She jumped out of the way, screaming in the process as she landed on the floor in front of her. When she got up, she heard the cries of her scared son. "Mama, where are you? I'm scared." His voice cried out from the fire and smoke. Haley covered her mouth and moved through the ashes of the house to find her son, making sure she didn't walk into the flames in the process as she followed the cries of her son, which led her towards the door to her closet. Unfortunately for Haley, a piece of burning roof had blocked her way from entering the closet to rescue her son. But lucky for her, she can just use her quirk. Haley closed her mouth, preventing her from breathing, but allowing her to use her quirk, which allowed her to walk through the roof and fire, and the door to her closet where her son was. "Son." Haley smiled, despite the life-threatening situation her and her son were in. He looked up, tears in his eyes as he saw his mother smile. He slightly perked up as he crawled over to her mother and hugged her. "Mama," he hugged his mother, who grabbed his hand. "Come on, we have to get out of here." She grabbed her son's hand and opened the door, bringing in the smoke from her house. She held her breath again, causing her quirk to affect her son as she held him. Together the mother and her child moved past the burning piece of roof again and back into the burning hallway. Now all they needed to do, suddenly something snapped above 𝐬𝐬 and her son. The two looked up and screamed as another piece of roof. This time a large chunk broke free and fell down towards the two, threatening to pin the two down and perhaps kill them. 𝐬𝐬 grabbed her son, knowing that there was no hope that the two will get out now. In a few seconds, it will all be over. But it wasn't over, because the piece of roof didn't hit them. Someone grabbed it. When the two looked up, they saw him, a large muscular man who was none worse for wear and had a big smile on his face, was holding the piece of roof that would have been 𝐬𝐬 and her son's undoing. The two realized who it was. The symbol of peace, the #1 hero of all of Japan, had come to China to save 𝐬𝐬 and her son's life. Or he was just passing by. The man, All Might. 𝐬𝐬's son cheered as All Might threw the piece of roof away from him. The mother and son as he looked down at the people trapped in the house. Don't worry, I'm here now, and you'll get out alive. All Might looks up and saw that the fire had quickly overcome the path he came in from. He still kept his smile, as after all, he can't actually make any other expressions, and his current expression is the one most people are familiar with. Ooh, let's not go out there. He leaned down. 𝐬𝐬 grabbed his hand, while her son grabbed hers, and quickly All Might charged through another hallway that didn't have much fire. When he got to a wall, he launched his fist forward. Texas smash! He shouted as he launched a right punch towards a wall, causing a large amount of wind to smash into it, and blasting a hole through the house to allow himself, 𝐬𝐬 and her son to escape and go into the crowd. The trio quickly did so and watched as the house finally collapsed due to the amount of damage that the fire has done. Once the house finished collapsing, the crowd turned towards All Might, 𝐬𝐬 and her son. The three were covered in ash, but they were okay. The crowd erupted in cheer for All Might's victory as he saved another person's life again. And it was actually his third time this week that he managed to save someone. He bowed and waved to everyone. Thank you, I was just passing by when I saw the house. Now this mother and her son will now be able to live for another beautiful day. All Might patted 𝐬𝐬's back. Her son was upset. Mama, I'm sorry. I didn't want the fire to hurt us. He tugged on his mother's leg as he began to cry again. 𝐬𝐬 hugged her son. It's okay, don't worry, we're safe now. She hugged her son. Don't fear, son of the woman I rescued. You will get a new house again, I'm sure of it. And you will master your quirk eventually. Just keep on trying, although don't use it in the house. He advised to the boy, who smiled and nodded, having stopped crying. He then waved at everyone in the crowd. Some were recording him, and some were taking photos of him. While the pro heroes with water quirks put out the rubble, like one man who had water shooting out in every orifice that he had. Yes, it is embarrassing, put out the fire that was accidentally caused. Peaceful residents of the 𝐬𝐬 district, you may rest for another day, as I helped make the neighborhood safe by saving these two residents. Be assured that if you have quirks and wish to make a difference, then take what happened as proof that you too can become a hero. He held up his thumb, causing the crowd to cheer. He then noticed a news van quickly parking at the back of the crowd, who turned and saw a group of news anchors getting out of the van. All Might, a word please, pleaded a news reporter from the van. All Might crouched down. Well, I would love to stay and take autographs with everyone here, but I must jump now. And with that, All Might jumped as high as he could away from the neighborhood. Much to everyone's disappointment that All Might had left so soon. But despite his suddenly leave, the news anchor turned towards his cameraman and began his news report anyway. Well, there you have it. All Might had once again saved the lives of residents in the world. Sure, a Chinese pro hero could have swooped in and saved their lives. But to be rescued by the symbol of peace is an achievement in itself. There was just one we left to wonder now. Where is All Might going, and who will he rescue next? Maybe it will be a celebrity or a political figure. We just have to find out. The boy smiled as the video ended, having woken up after getting a notification on his phone about the video. The video, which had his idol All Might saved a woman and her child from certain doom at a burning house, was missing for decades until it was found and posted on the All Might fan website this morning. And when his phone buzzed, he quickly woke up as he got the message. He couldn't wait until he shows his friend the video. Although the boy's friend didn't really care for All Might, she did show interest in heroes, but not as much as him. Still, he wanted everyone he knows to see the video, including his mother. He was also glad that the All Might fan site was up, as, after all the other websites were taken down following the construction of the wall and the incident. He didn't want to think about the incident for today. because today, for Midoriya Izuku, it was going to be another normal day in his hometown of Iwata. Izuku-kun. The cheerful voice of Izuku's mother, 𝐴𝐻𝐻, called out from the kitchen of the house Izuku had lived in. He got up and looked around in his room that was filled with All Might merchandise. Izuku was probably the only person in Japan that had the most All Might merchandise, due to being his biggest fan after all, and to heroes in general. Yes, heroes were Izuku's most favorite thing in the world, except for his mother of course, and his friends, Miyako, and, well, his other friend. He always loved heroes' wisdom, their quirks, and most important of all, their morals and how they stick to them, especially when it comes to rescuing lives. All the heroes that Izuku has taken note of were wonderful people according to the media. And it's because of people like them that Izuku strives to make sure his dream becomes a reality in one way or another one day. His dream is, as you probably already guessed, was to become a hero. Coming mom, Izuku joyfully called out to his mother as he fixed his bed and walked out of his bedroom, where he got changed into his more familiar school clothes and ran downstairs to finish getting ready, straightening his tie. Hey, Mom, Dio Izuku, you just arrived now. 𝐴𝐻𝐻 was surprised when she heard Izuku's voice, gasping as she began to panic. Izuku was confused at best as to why his mother was worried. What do you mean, isn't it still time for breakfast? He asked as 𝐴𝐻𝐻 pointed towards the clock in the kitchen. Izuku looked up and gasped when he realized what time it was. It was almost time for him to head to school, and he hasn't even brushed his teeth or had breakfast yet. Like his mother, Izuku's worry and anxiety runs through the family. He ran over to the sink and grabbed his toothbrush. Not having time, he used his mother toothpaste and quickly brushed his teeth before spitting in the sink and rinsing with his mouth. Izuku dropped his toothbrush in the glass where the toothbrushes were previously, taking the time to not make sure he pushed any of the other toothbrushes in the glass over as well, the only other toothbrush being 𝐴𝐻𝐻's. He then went to grab his bag and looked at his breakfast on the table. Katsudon. Izuku felt touched that 𝐴𝐻𝐻 had made his favorite food for breakfast today. 𝐴𝐻𝐻 nodded. Of course, you always did love it, Midoriya-kun. And since you're about to go into your final year of junior high very soon, I thought this should be a little celebration, she revealed. Izuku smiled, happy that his mother had done such a thing, although now he had to eat it while heading to school. Izuku grabbed the katsudon and quickly began to eat into it as he turned and walked towards the front door. 𝐴𝐻𝐻 followed, and when the two got to the front door, Izuku had finished and gave the empty bowl to his mother before quickly bowing. Thank you, Mom. He thanked his mother as he turned. He was about to run out down the road towards his school, when 𝐴𝐻𝐻 realized that her son had forgotten something. Oh, Midoriya-kun, she called out as her son reached the gates of his house. He turned back, curious. What's wrong, Mom? He asked. 𝐴𝐻𝐻 took out the notebook and walked over to Izuku, giving it to him. You dropped it just now. It's your notebook, right? Full of heroes? She asked. Izuku looked down and realized that it was his notebook, his most prized treasure. Ever since he was given this notebook at the start of junior high, Izuku had been using it to take account on heroes that he knows of, such as All Might or Eraserhead. With this notebook, Izuku knows information regarding most of the heroes across from Japan, and a few from outside the country. He would be even more stressed than he already was if he discovered that it was missing, which thankfully it was not thanks to his mother. He loved his notebook and wished he could show it to everyone in his class, but so far only Miyako and his mother had looked at it, since nobody in his class, well, the entire school doesn't like heroes. Thank you, Mom. Izuku smiled as he walked through the gate of his house and began to run down the street towards his school, as his mother waved him goodbye. Have a nice day at school, Midoriya-kun. 𝐴𝐻𝐻 really meant that, since Izuku was said to have difficulty in school, not with studies or all of that. Her son was actually doing relatively well as a student there. But his homeroom teacher had stated to her countless times that Izuku was the least popular in his class. It saddened 𝐴𝐻𝐻 that because of Izuku's love for heroes, nobody in class, except for his friend Miyako, likes him. 𝐴𝐻𝐻 worries most of the time when her son talks about his dream to become a hero like All Might or the other heroes he talks about, because she knows and fears very much that Izuku's dream will be impossible, and that his heart will one day be broken when he will be forced to accept something like that. And it pains 𝐴𝐻𝐻 each day to see Izuku so optimistic on a difficult dream to achieve. And even if his dream will come true, 𝐴𝐻𝐻 might lose him to the zone. But no matter what, 𝐴𝐻𝐻 will always stand by her son, and he will get his dream in one way or another. Maybe by the time he does, things will be peaceful again like it was when she was her son's age. He could always become a police officer as well. They're heroes. But then 𝐀𝐦 will fear that one day, when Izuku will be out on the job, he may never come back. Despite crime having gone down when love took control, there was always a chance her son could be shot by a rouge criminal. She wondered if Izuku's other friend was still around. He had to be, since 𝐀𝐦 tends to hang out with his mother whenever they can. Maybe he's got caught up with studies. Mitsuki did say his son was smart, but she doesn't talk about him that often these days. But according to her, Katsuki can be a little arrogant with everyone around him at times. Izuku didn't know what the time was now. Only that if he didn't get to school on time, he will probably be late. He was never late. Nor did the homeroom teacher care if he was late at all. Izuku had the feeling that teacher never really liked him like everyone else in the class sans Miyoko. And that included him. Izuku soon reached an entrance to a park. He stopped to catch his break before realizing that if he ran through the park, he could get to the school on time, since the park is usually a shortcut for him. Plus, he liked walking through this park as it was beautiful, and he loved to take in the scenery. His mother often took him to this park when he was little. But as the years went on, Izuku just walked around here by himself. After catching his breath, Izuku began to walk into the park, noticing that not a lot of people were out this morning. Possibly because some are already at school or at work, so they won't have time. He quickly looked around, enjoying the scenery of the park. From the leaves that were slowly beginning to grow again on the trees around him, to the wet grass that was drying up from the rain last night. Izuku made sure not to also step on any incoming puddles that were in front of him, as well as he took a deep breath to take in the breeze. Izuku loved spring, as it was his favorite season, because, on days like these, he can enjoy the outdoors before doing some hard work at school. But that of course was interrupted when he heard the familiar hissing sound. Izuku's eyes were closed when he heard the hissing, but were quickly opened to see where the noise was coming from. The only thing he could say was a weak 𝐀𝐦 as he looked around. And that was when he saw him at the end of the path, 𝐀𝐦, or as he's normally called Katsuki Bakugo, standing by the path near the exit of the park. He was looking at something that was hidden from Izuku's view, which he realized what it was. Katsuki himself was standing there, looking angered at the thing he was looking at. Normally Katsuki would be seen with an angered grin on his face, and maybe sometimes a few veins could be seen beating across his forehead here and there. But his anger was different as Izuku got closer and tried to sneak past him. His anger was dismal, like he watched someone he loved vanish from his life, and he was angry at himself that he couldn't do anything about it. In front of Katsuki was a fence which he had both of his hands on, his school bag hanging by his shoulder as his two blood-red eyes were focused on what he was looking at. Izuku and Katsuki were childhood friends, but an incident in the past caused the boys' friendship to dwindle. Now Katsuki often belittles and beats up Izuku when he had the chance. Izuku never understood why Katsuki just up and hated him one day. But he knows that in some way, it was his fault. It was always his fault. People often blame him after all, such as Katsuki for being weak and not being able to stand up to the spiky-haired blonde. But even if Katsuki hates him with a vengeance, Izuku still has hope that one day, Katsuki will change his tune, apologize to Izuku, and maybe they can be friends now. But of course, that was something that even Izuku himself knew wasn't going to happen. Just thinking about the times he, Katsuki and Miyoko had together, slightly made him tear up. Deku. Izuku stopped in his tracks when he heard Katsuki's voice. He gasped as he began to sweat when he realized that he was spotted by Katsuki, who was now standing behind him, now not looking at. As Izuku turned to his side. At the wall. A large steel wall at the end of Iwata was looming down on the buildings and citizens, which spans from across the middle of Japan. Looking at the wall made Izuku even sadder and Katsuki even more pissed off. So he had decided to take his anger out on Izuku, since after all, he was walking by, which was fortunate to him, but not for Izuku. Move out of the fucking way, you weak nerd. He pushed Izuku over, causing him to fall on a nearby puddle. Izuku looked up. His bag and school clothes were wet. 𝐀𝐦, you made my clothes wet. Watch where you're going, please. Izuku slightly stuttered as Katsuki looked down at him, giving him a furious glare. I don't give a fuck that I made you wet. Like you would do anything at all, you fucking weak piece of shit. Izuku closed his eyes, expecting Katsuki to punch him, and Katsuki wished he could. But he couldn't. 𝐀𝐦, you're a waste of time, and I don't have time to beat up weak fuckers like you. Katsuki began to slouch away, moving towards the exit of the park and into the street to continue on his way to school. Izuku got up, slightly feeling dismal over what happened. But strangely, he was surprised that Katsuki didn't even punch him. Katsuki actually looked slightly bitter as he moved out from the park for some reason. But looking at the wall again, Izuku could understand why. The wall itself blocks half of Japan, preventing those who are quirkless to enter the quirk zone, which, as you may have guessed, is a zone for people with quirks. Ever since the political party 𝐸 came into existence, they introduced a bill to create these quirk zones, to protect the quirkless from those who were born with quirks. The wall came at a time when many people were looking for a leader. And so 𝐸 and the leader of that party appeared and provided a solution to the people. And that was the quirk border. Many people supported the bill, especially after this came after the event known as Mageddon, an event that changed people's view on heroes. Particularly All Might, the supposed mastermind behind Mageddon, as most people believe. Some, like Izuku, believe he was innocent. But they were in the minority of people who believed that All Might was the mastermind. As he left the park and headed to school, Izuku noticed one thing from the fence he was standing by. And it wasn't a poster that was near the fence about 𝐸. It was that. The fence strangely had burnt marks on them, which was strange because Katsuki was the last person that was gripping onto the fence. They looked new and hot when Izuku touched the marks. Ah, hot, hot. He sucked his finger. He looked around before walking out of the park. Surely it couldn't have been Katsuki. He doesn't have a quirk, or else he wouldn't even be here right now. Katsuki's old friends did. But they were gone, having been taken to the quirk zone. Katsuki slowly become a loner in class. He often sits alone now and doesn't talk to anyone other than Miyoko, and when Izuku is alone, he appears to him just so he can bully him. But sometimes, Izuku would often notice how depressed Katsuki will look in class, sometimes because he was alone. Izuku shook his head and continued to head to school, thinking that the burnt marks on the fence were something else. He continued to head to school, where it was going to be another regular, if boring day, although he can't help but feel as though the giant wall to the quirk zone was looming down over him, waiting for him to be revealed to have a quirk he knows he will never have, and take him away where the rest of the people who had quirks in Japan were. He felt a big lump on his throat as he tried to think of other less depressing subject like the quirk border. Heroes were not looked well upon these days. Izuku clearly knew that during his time at Iwata Junior High, he may as well be the only person in this school to like heroes. But he could understand why everyone would hate them, or at least be afraid of them. And it all had to do with Mageddon. A terrible event nobody would like to talk about. And it was the reason something like the quirk border is standing today. Or why people like members of 𝐸 are trying to protect Japan and prevent another Mageddon from happening again. Izuku had finally arrived at his school. He was surprised to see that he got here before Katsuki, despite the boy leaving the park before him. Something must have caught Katsuki's eye, or at least, he used an alternate route to get to the school. Either way, Izuku had to get into the school and fast before Katsuki creeps up behind him again. He ran forward, past a few other students standing behind trees or benches around the area. Some students glared at Izuku, knowing his reputation in this school was the hero lover, or the kid that loves terrorists, which he tried his best to ignore, but thinking about those nicknames hurt Izuku sometimes, and makes him lose focus at what he's looking at in front of him, which was a rock that Izuku tripped over. Huh! Izuku suddenly shirked as he fell forward, his head falling towards another rock that just so happened to be near the other rock that Izuku had just tripped on. Izuku didn't have time to brace himself, so his head could smash right into that rock, and it would have too, and would have given him brain damage, had his friend not come to the rescue and grabbed Izuku by the collar of his jacket. Izuku sweated over his near brush with death as he turned to the person that helped him. It was a girl that was familiar to Izuku, as she was his childhood friend, having met each other since at the age of 3 through a playdate in a park. The girl smiled, her one green eye perking up upon seeing her childhood friend, and as for her other eye, it was covered in an eye patch due to an incident in her past, which she doesn't like to talk about. Miyoko-chan, thanks for saving my life. Izuku bowed quickly, feeling embarrassed for almost slipping and getting killed. Something which he felt would have caused everyone around the area to laugh at him dying from such a stupid death. Miyoko happily rolled her eye. I'm just glad that I was sitting on a bench nearby. Although you probably wouldn't have died. You would either be sent into a coma or get brain damage. Miyoko pointed out as she and Izuku laughed, before Miyoko suddenly became melancholy. Like what happened to Nobita in that one Doraemon doujinshi that I read. She lamented. The two decided to walk to the school with each other now that they have met up. So how is your tarot reading going along? Think you could read fortunes in the near future? Izuku asked, causing Miyoko to smirk. Well, I have to hide them yesterday as my parents were that close to finding them. But I'm not sure if I'll be able to read fortunes yet, Izuku-kun. I still have my training sessions eating away at my life. Miyoko talked about what she did yesterday. Of course, you would be the first person I would tell your fortune to, Izuku-kun, free of price, and I say you have a lot going ahead for you in your future already. She joked. As did Izuku soon after. Ha, and you too. Oh, that reminds me, they finally found the video, Izuku revealed to Miyoko, who gasped excitingly. You mean that lost All Might video from that fan site you always go on? I'm surprised something like that is up. The police here care more about taking down pro-hero support fan sites than websites like the Red Room, Miyoko grumbled before watching the video with Izuku, the two sitting by the stairs to the school. Miyoko was impressed at All Might's rescue, while Izuku gushed happily at watching the video again. He may have to save this video in case it got lost again. All Might is amazing, don't you think? Izuku turned towards his childhood friend, who smiled. Of course. Do you think he's still doing hero work? Miyoko wondered. Thinking about such a thing made Izuku upset, and looked forward at the numerous students standing around at the school. I'm not sure. He hasn't been seen since the Quirk Zone was created. And after what people believe, I don't think he could be seen in public again, at least, not around here. Izuku saw the wall from afar, and thought about the sparks on the fence that Katsuki had gripped on earlier. Say, Miyoko-chan. Izuku looked at Miyoko again, who turned towards him, having gotten out her phone. Yeah, Izuku-kun, she responded. With the way people with quirks are looked down upon, do you think it will ever be possible for me to become a hero? He gripped his stomach. I just get this sensation that no matter how hard I try to achieve my dream, it will be impossible for me to become a hero. I don't have any quirks or skills and people tend to shoot me down when I talk about my dream. Izuku gripped his stomach harder, but Miyoko patted his back for comfort. Izuku-kun, it doesn't matter what those assholes and Katsuki-kun say about you not becoming a hero. Quirk or not, you can always train to defend yourself. You can be a hero in many ways. Izuku smiled. And you will become a hero, Izuku. You just need to focus on your dream, and you can make it happen. The two stood up, Izuku feeling a bit better for himself. Thanks for the prep talk. Izuku smiled at his friend. Izuku and Miyoko's continued to talk about their futures, which was soon interrupted by the arrival of a familiar spiky-haired blonde. Deku. Katsuki hissed. Izuku gulped as he began to sweat. Izuku and Miyoko turned towards Katsuki. Kakakin, nice to see you again. He weakly waved at Katsuki, only for Miyoko to grab Izuku's hand again and shook her head. Izuku-kun, you want to defend yourself from bullies, right? She whispered as Katsuki simply looked at the two. His eyes moving up to his head, so they were pure white, and his teeth clenching to show how infuriated he was. I do. Izuku turned to Katsuki. Well, stand your ground. He's the same age as everyone else here. I know you can do it. I got your back as well. Miyoko cheered Izuku on as Katsuki began to approach. Him and Miyoko showing a strange look at how Katsuki can move despite his eyes moving up to his head, before moving back down when he breathed down at Izuku. Move the fuck away, he warned Izuku, who breathed heavily. Engra, Katsuki suddenly delivered his fist into Izuku's stomach, causing him to fall to his side as the boy grabbed his stomach in pain. Izuku-kun. Miyoko was shocked as she walked over to help Izuku up. Katsuki looked down at the two, particularly at Miyoko. Ugh, even after all those years, you're still hanging around with Deku, Miyoko-chan. Why do you always stick by a scum like him? Katsuki remembered an event that happened between the three yesterday after school, which caused friction between him and Miyoko. Izuku and Miyoko soon stood up. Because Izuku-kun is a better friend than you, Katsuki. He doesn't go around beating people up just because of something stupid. Miyoko defended herself from Katsuki. He glared at her. Oh really? You think my reasons for targeting that molded shrimp is stupid? You don't even know what they are. Katsuki countered, only for Miyoko to counter back. I know it's probably something that doesn't involve beating up your old friend to a damn pulp. Izuku slightly turned to Miyoko, feeling bad for causing this. This is all my fault, I'm sorry. Izuku felt very bad for causing Miyoko and Katsuki to argue. Those two used to be very close, but ever since yesterday, Miyoko is not even giving Katsuki proper eye contact. Katsuki moved back from the duo. 𝐀𝐦, I have reasons why that cunt Deku needs to be punched a square or two every day. Katsuki proceeded to walk into the building as Izuku and Miyoko silently watched, with Miyoko having a look of sadness that Izuku had noticed. So, Miyoko-chan, do you have any visual novels that you want to show me? Izuku wanted to change the conversation and to get into the building as the students outside were giving him and Miyoko strange looks. Oh yeah. And just like that, Miyoko's mood changed to that of her happy self again as she held out her phone. Do you like magic, Midoriya? She smiled, clearly being a magic fan herself. Well, she was into the occult. But Izuku spoke back with a no, causing Miyoko to lower her phone. Awa, in that case, the only one is this weird All Might visual novel where you can date him or someone called Eraserhead. Miyoko showed Izuku the game Date 𝐬𝐻RO, version 6. 6 inches with a picture of a green-haired Eraserhead and a red-haired All Might. Izuku wasn't that impressed, although judging by the comments, the 5 people that have played this game appear to have chosen the Eraserhead route for some reason. A few seconds later, Izuku and Miyoko had arrived to class, the latter yawning as she rubbed her tired eyes, just as the bell had rung. Katsuki was leaning behind Izuku and Miyoko, in his desk that was almost ruined. It had drawings and scribbles all over it to show his love and kindness to the desk, including such words as "fuck the border" or "Deku needs to punch himself," the latter written in the center of Katsuki's desk so Izuku would be able to see it. Izuku and Miyoko ignored Katsuki, although Miyoko did wave at Katsuki, who, despite Miyoko not seeing it, waved back at her as the two sat at their own desks and the homeroom teacher soon entered, clearly not giving a crap about the class he was working in. However, he did show a bit of happiness, knowing that all of the students were in class today, not unlike yesterday where only half of the class showed up because the other half had to go to some award ceremony he could care less about. The teacher just wanted his pay and to go home for the day. But today has just gotten started. Right, good morning, blah blah. Just don't try and do anything stupid before next period starts. I'm going to call everyone's names and I hope you answer this time. I don't want anyone fooling around. He eyed Katsuki, who was leaning back in his chair, not caring at all for homeroom. He does care for the next lesson, which was music. That goes for you too, Bakugo. He decided not to use an honorific, to show his distaste for the boy, who also didn't show love for his teacher either. Don't even start. He snapped back, causing some other students to whisper throughout the class. Clearly, I'm your favorite teacher. He sarcastically took out the roster and began to call out people's names. He sighed heavily when, after calling out a few of the students' name, he came on to Izuku's name. Midoriya Izuku. He called out the name of his least favorite student in the class. He hated him more than Bakugo due to his love for freaks like them. Izuku politely raised his hand. Here, he called out. He then went with the next name, which was Miyoko's. He expected Miyoko to get into a good school by the end of her time at junior high, like all of the other students. Although her being around Izuku and Katsuki made him worried that she will not have a good future. He also hated the way that Miyoko stood up, bowed and raised her hand. It was like she was trying to show off. Present, sensei. Miyoko sat back down, smiling, although it turned to a frown when the teacher reacted. You don't have to show off, you know. Prompting laughter from the class. But 𝐼𝐼R stares at Izuku and Katsuki when the boys felt bad for Miyoko's blunder. She sighed, expecting this kind of thing. The teacher really did hate his job after all. Bakugo Katsuki. He called out Katsuki next. I'm here, aren't I? He retorted like before. The teacher lowered his roster after calling out the last few names of the class. With everyone being accounted for, all the class needed to do was wait for the bell to ring to begin must at least. This would have been a normal waiting period had the doors at the side of the class didn't slide open and 4 people in black suits entered the classroom. The students were confused at first, until Izuku noticed the suits they were wearing. Those were the kind of suits Quirk patrol officers would wear. People who hunt down those with quirks when the other force can't get to them and send them to the quirk zone by force. The group, which had 2 men and 2 women, looked at the students in class. Quirk patrol officers. Izuku began to sweat. His muttering of the group caused the class to go silent. Katsuki stopped leaning on his chair and sat straight, with a look of worry on his face as he grabbed the side of his desk. He looked down at his hands, noticing sweat, before wiping it away. Because he can't do that right now. Use it. Excuse me, why are you here? We don't have a student in this class with a quirk. The teacher growled, clearly showing signs of annoyance as one of the women held up her phone and showed the teacher the phone. She walked over to him and allowed the teacher to see a video on the phone, taken by someone in no less than a few hours ago. Screaming and panicking can be heard in the video, as the students began to talk to themselves, wondering who the student with the quirk was. Izuku, Katsuki, and Miyoko clearly showed the most signs of worry as Izuku and Miyoko turned towards Katsuki, who wasn't looking at them. But he looked like he was going to collapse from fear any second. Izuku was surprised by this, as Katsuki was never anxious of anything, so seeing him frightened in the presence of Quirk patrol officers made him suspicious, thinking about the fence earlier that day. "I can't believe it." The teacher was in disbelief as the video ended. "We believe that the student in question is in this class." The woman put her phone away. One of the men pointed at the back near where Katsuki was sitting. Katsuki's heart briefly stopped. "Miss Takano, may you please come with us?" Before it began beaten again, as Katsuki turned beside him in surprise. The girl sitting beside him, Emi Takano, began to panic as she stood up from her desk. Izuku, Miyoko, and everyone else in the classroom turned to face Emi as the Quirk patrol officers slowly moved towards her. "No, please, it was an accident. I didn't mean to use my quirk, please, I don't want to go." Emi took a step back away from her desk. "Stop making this hard for yourself, Miss Takano," one of the women stated in a tone that was emotionless and wanting to get the job over with. One of the men slowly reached down to his pocket to grab something, which Emi realized what it was. It was a taser, making Emi panic. "Where are my parents? I want to talk to them." She backed to the wall behind her as the officers closed in. "They won't be needed. They will be informed once this is all over," the female officer told the girl, who began to tear up and bang on the wall, as she couldn't do any more than that. "No, I don't want to leave my friends. Please don't take me away." She smashed her hands into the wall, clearly not feeling the pain. Everyone in the room gasped when they realized that Emi did have a quirk. A quirk that made her strong. "Holy shit," Katsuki blurted out, grinning in fear as a bunch of students talked to themselves. Izuku and Miyoko kept to their seats, as the former put a hand to his mouth in shock and sadness. Miyoko's expression was of the dismal kind as well, when she realized that the officers were not going to go easy on Emi now that she showed proof that she had a quirk in her panic. "Takano-san has a quirk?" Izuku spoke through his mouth, lowering his hands as Emi pulled her hands out from the wall and looked at the officers. "I'm sorry, I'm so gra." She let out a scream as the officer with the taser hit her with it. She fell to the ground, having fainted from the shock. Another officer took out some handcuffs and cuffed Emi's hands as everyone looked on in silence, while Izuku, Miyoko, and surprisingly Katsuki looked on in sadness. The rest of the students in the classroom showed happiness at what the officers did. Even Emi's friends did not seem to care that their friend was hurt by them in an attempt to detain her. Since she had a quirk now, her friends see her as a freak like they do with anyone with a quirk. "We're sorry for the disturbance. We don't pay for broken walls." The officers bowed before dragging Emi out of the classroom as the class remained in silence. Katsuki's look of sadness soon turned to that of enmity. He wanted to break his desk after what he saw. It wasn't fair, with how people like Emi were treated. It pissed him off. Izuku and Miyoko felt the same way. But unfortunately, they don't have the power, quirks, to intervene and help Emi. The three will just have to see if Emi will do okay in the quirk zone, as nobody knows what goes on in that zone. After a few minutes of silence, the teacher broke it. "Well, thanks to Miss Takano's display of ignorance, it is about time to begin music, so forget about her and leave." And just like that, the bell for the next period began to ring, and as Izuku began to get ready to head to music, he heard some of the students gossiping about Emi. "I can't believe Emi had a quirk. I knew that bitch had it coming. I wonder who's going to be the next student outed. I want it to be Midoriya, Bakugo, or even Miyoko. Nobody will care if they're gone, especially Bakugo. He's giving this class a bad reputation. I'm glad everyone who stuck by him are almost gone." It was fortunate that Katsuki had already left the room for music when Izuku had heard the gossip in the classroom, as he would have caused a fight if heard that. Miyoko was standing by the door, wanting to walk down with Izuku, and as he met up and smiled for his friend, the two walked down the halls, both thinking about what happened at class just now. "Takano-san, do you think she'll be all right in the quirk zone, Izuku-kun?" Miyoko asked sincerely to Izuku. Both students showed signs of worry for the girl. "I hope so. Who knows what goes on in the quirk zone? But I just hope that Takano-san gets back with her parents and are safe." And thus, the two continued to head to music. 28-5, 25, 8, 1, 22, 5, 5, 25, 5, 19, 5, 22, 5, 18, 25, 23, 8, 5, 18, 5. Ever since 𝐬𝐸 was taken by the Quirk patrol officers, things at school were relatively okay for Izuku. That is, until the incident at lunch changed things. It all started with Izuku packing up his work after a hard time with the period before lunch, which was his most difficult subject, and for most likely anyone else who had this subject in school. Math. Just seeing the word written in chalk in his classroom board sent Izuku shivers down his spine. Especially since the teacher would always call him for any question whenever he can, and every time Izuku failed to answer the classroom, he would be met with laughter from the classroom over his blunder, while Katsuki would simply smirk and Miyoko would remain silent, feeling bad for Izuku and his growing anxiety. But luckily it was over, and now Izuku was doodling a picture of All Might before he left to have lunch. He was improving his drawing skills these past few months. Maybe he should show it to Miyoko and his mother when he gets home. Speaking of which, Miyoko approached Izuku, holding a dark box. "Izuku-kun," Miyoko called out as Izuku looked up. He placed the notebook at the side of his desk, which caught the eye of Katsuki. He was about to leave to have lunch at the side of the school. Hopefully that cat that often hangs around at that part of the school was there, so he can give him a piece of his sandwich. But seeing the notebook caused Katsuki to smirk as he realized that he can get something that he can blackmail Izuku with. And since Izuku was currently distracted, now was Katsuki's chance to get his stupid notebook. "Hi, Miyoko-chan." Izuku waved at his friend, who pointed at the door to the hallway. "Want to have lunch on the roof? I found this creepy ghost video we can watch." Miyoko asked. Izuku was slightly spooked, but was nevertheless just as excited as Miyoko when she mentioned the video. "Oh, okay, let me just get my lunch. It's in my shoe locker." Izuku stood up and proceeded to walk out of the classroom with Miyoko, who was surprised at the location of Izuku's lunch. "It's in your shoe locker. Why there of all places?" she asked. But before Izuku could say anything else, the two were out of the classroom and out of Katsuki's earshot. And since Izuku had forgotten his notebook, Katsuki walked over to Izuku's desk and quickly swooped it away from his desk when nobody was looking, before slouching out of the classroom and heading towards the side of the school to see what Izuku was writing on his notebook. A few minutes later, Izuku and Miyoko had returned to the classroom after getting Izuku's lunch. Miyoko stayed outside, while Izuku had to go in the classroom. "I'll be with you in a second, Miyoko. I just need my notebook," he informed before walking towards his desk, having forgotten to grab his notebook when he left to get his lunch. And then he realized it was missing, which caused Izuku to jump in surprise and began to sweat in horror over his missing. And since it hasn't fallen from his desk, stolen notebook, Izuku calmed himself down, knowing that the notebook and the possible thief haven't gotten very far. The student must have thought that the notebook didn't belong to Izuku and took it to Lost and Found. Izuku was about to head towards the door when he heard the familiar deep laughter of Katsuki from a window behind him. "Huh, 𝐀𝐦." Izuku knew that Katsuki often hangs around at the side of the school during lunch, but he never heard him laugh in a long while, not since his last friend was in class with him before he was sent to the Quirk zone. Izuku walked towards the window and looked down to see Katsuki reading his notebook. He can tell since he drew his first doodle of All Might at the front of the page, and Katsuki was currently reading it. He was about to shout Bakugu's name, but doing that will probably cause him to throw the notebook into the old fountain Katsuki was sitting behind and ruin his notebook. He needed to see him in person, and fast. Izuku placed his lunch on his desk and ran out of the classroom, running into Miyoko again, who noticed the distressed look on his friend's face. "Izuku-kun, what happened? You looked like you saw a ghost. Did you see a ghost?" she asked, looking slightly excited, but he shook his head. "No, 𝐀𝐦, he took my notebook. I need to get to the side of the school now," he slightly yelled. Miyoko gasped and growled. "That asshole. But are you sure you want to do this alone?" she asked. Izuku nodded, and so did Miyoko soon after. "I'm not going to stop you, but be careful. You know how violent he is with you, and anything he touches, like your notebook." Miyoko wished Izuku luck, who slightly stopped panicking to apologize. "I'm sorry that we can't spend lunch, by the way," he apologized, but Miyoko interrupted him. "It's fine, Izuku-kun. But right now Katsuki-kun has your notebook. You should be trying to stop him instead of apologizing. That fake ghost video can wait." Miyoko rushed Izuku to get his notebook, and he left soon after while Miyoko watched, hoping things go well for Izuku without fists being raised, and that he and Katsuki don't get punished. Katsuki laughed at the drawings in Izuku's notebook. especially the ones of All Might and other heroes he doesn't know. Deku always did have a thing with heroes and always wanted to be one when he was older. But Katsuki knew that it wasn't going to happen, knowing that Deku was weak, especially when he can be beaten up easily. Which, when he heard Izuku's angered cries of 𝐀𝐦, meant that Katsuki had managed to get under the boy's skin, which was rare for him to do since Izuku was upbeat before Katsuki tends to ruin his day, such as now. He placed the notebook onto his lap and turned towards Izuku, who gave Katsuki the most serious look that he can give in this situation. He raised his arm. "My notebook." He motioned for Katsuki to give him the notebook, which caused the bully to snicker as he waved Izuku's notebook high in the air. "You really expect me to take you seriously, Deku? If you try to fight me for your stupid notebook, then you can already tell how that's going to end." Katsuki taunted Izuku before standing up from the fountain. Izuku approached. "𝐀𝐦, I don't want to fight you. I just want you to give me back my notebook, and we can just end this now. We don't have to make eye contact for the rest of the day." Izuku raised his hand again for Katsuki to give him back his notebook. "Please, I know how kind you can be," so Katsuki hissed as he threw the notebook into the fountain. Izuku turned and gasped as he saw the notebook sink into the waters of the fountain. "Deku, it's made clear that this school sees me as some sort of villain that needs me to die. I'm never seen as kind, and this is my proof." Katsuki looked at his hands and clenched them again in annoyance. Izuku ran to the fountain and took out his notebook from it. "No, why?" "But..." Izuku opened the notebook and teared up when he saw that some of the pages were now wet, almost ripped and dirty. Some of the doodles that Izuku had spent time on, including his new doodle of All Might, were ruined. Katsuki smirked, noticing the tears coming from Izuku's eyes. Even if he tried to act tough, he would still cry like he always does. And that amused Katsuki, knowing how easily he can do that to Izuku, who clutched his notebook, his ruined personal item, as he tried to hold back his tears. "You should quit while you're ahead. Nobody cares if you'll become a hero, Deku. Not your mother, not Miyako-chan, nobody." He taunted Izuku again, who snapped back. "You're wrong," he yelled out of the top of the lungs, which actually surprised Katsuki. So surprised, in fact, that it made him indignant. "Did you just say I was wrong?" Katsuki watched as Izuku stepped up from the fountain and turned, showing a look of fury from his tearful eyes. "I can become a hero, 𝐀𝐦, not today or tomorrow. But someday, my mother and Miyako-chan believe I can do it even when people like you say I can't." He pointed to Katsuki, who clenched his fists once more. He began to sweat in exasperation. "You can as well. We used to be friends. But then you hated me for some reason. You hated my guts. You don't want me to succeed, even though I didn't do anything." Izuku clutched his notebook tighter as he and Katsuki moved around. Now Izuku was standing in front of the wall to the school, while Katsuki was standing in front of the fountain. The loud confrontation between the boys got the attention of a girl with glasses who was standing by one of the windows above Izuku and Katsuki. Upon seeing the two, the girl realized how interesting this fight would be, and so took out her phone to record it. "Why do you hate me, 𝐀𝐦?" Izuku asked. Katsuki clenched his fist tightly, which, if he had sharp enough nails, would have cut through his skin right now. However, instead of doing that, his sweat began to sparkle. "Don't you dare." Katsuki spat out as Izuku stepped forward, not seeing his sparkles. "No, is it because your friends are gone, so you take out your anger on me? You always put me down for no reason at all. If something bad were to happen to me, I bet you wouldn't even care." He yelled back, shaking his head tearfully. "You don't care for anyone at this school. Don't you fucking say that." Izuku gasped when Katsuki raised both of his hands, and suddenly a large explosive blast was shot out towards Izuku, who jumped out of the way, causing the blast to shoot into the wall that Izuku was standing behind instead, and causing a rumble from across the school. The girl with glasses almost dropped her phone when the blast had hit the building, but luckily for her, she didn't drop it. But she now realized that she had very interesting footage. As the smoke cleared, Katsuki breathed heavily, before realizing the large hole into the empty classroom that he made with his quirk. He looked down, realizing what he did. The arms from his school clothes ripped from the use of his quirk as he turned to Izuku, who had saw everything, including Katsuki's quirk. "𝐀𝐦, you have a quirk?" Izuku was in disbelief as Katsuki stepped away, shocked at what he's done. "No. Shit, no. I didn't. I shouldn't. GRR. He turned and ran away as a fire alarm went off throughout Iwata Junior High. Izuku got up and reached for Katsuki. "𝐀𝐦, wait." Izuku felt bad for all of this. He provoked Katsuki into using his quirk. He almost exposed him. But now he understood. This had to be the reason on why Katsuki was mean this entire time. Because he had a secret that would threaten to give him the same fate as to what happened to his old friends. "I'm sorry," Izuku muttered from under his breath, before hearing an announcement coming from inside the school. From the empty classroom that Izuku had looked in, he saw a swarm of students moving past around the hallway from the class window. "Attention students." The school announcer spoke from the intercom. "There has been an accident in classroom 3B. Please leave the premise immediately until the police and paramedics arrive and check out the premise. Please stay safe and stay in your class group until it is safe to re-enter the school. Thank you." He finished his announcement. Izuku looked down at his notebook, wiping away his tears. He then started to run down the side of the school to reunite with everyone in his class. He began to worry about Katsuki, but reassured himself that he would be all right, as nobody had spotted him or recorded him. Unknown to Izuku, he was recorded, and the girl with glasses who had recorded the incident was intending to take her footage to the Quirk patrol officers after school. Once they see the footage, they will waste no time in hunting Katsuki down and drag him away into the Quirk zone. Sure, Izuku and Miyoko will be depressed, especially the latter since she's always seen with a long face. But the girl, like everyone else in the school, could give less of a shit of those two. She was actually disappointed that Izuku didn't have a quirk that she could have recorded on her phone. That way she would have gotten rid of two pests in this school. But her seeing him and Miyoko miserable over Katsuki being taken away would make her day. What with how the two are close with him. So while it was a good day for her, for Bakugo Katsuki, it was going to be hell. Little Izuku ran down the halls of his house in happiness over what time it was. It was time for him to watch videos of his favorite heroes, mostly All Might and the many rescues he has done. Izuku slid across the floor towards the kitchen where 𝐀𝐦 was, who was chopping up some onions for dinner later that night. Surprisingly for a woman who cries a lot, the onions were not stinging her eyes. Lucky for Izuku, he didn't slip and fall when he reached the door to the kitchen like the last few times he did, such as yesterday. As he slid to the doorway, he briefly looked down at the bandage on his knee from last night's incident. But he didn't want to think about his knee right now, because right now it was time to watch videos of All Might. Mama, it's time to watch videos of heroes. Come on, hurry." He ran towards 𝐀𝐦 and tugged on her apron. 𝐀𝐦 stopped and looked down happily towards Izuku. "Oh yeah, it is time. Hang on, let me get everything ready for you, Izuku." She smiled at her son as she proceeded to walk out of the kitchen, with Izuku following behind, still tugging at her apron. The two soon arrived at Izuku's room, which had a large computer and desk chair, which little Izuku climbed up on and grew excited with watching more videos of All Might and other heroes. So much so that he started to rock the desk chair that was large for someone like him to sit on back and forth, while 𝐀𝐦 looked for an All Might playlist. "I found a playlist, Izuku. Watch this while I prepare dinner since these videos kind of scares me." 𝐀𝐦 was surprised that her son would often watch these videos and be fazed by these sorts of things, such as death, destruction, and even people in distress. Izuku was joyous as long as there was a hero on screen, while 𝐀𝐦, who sometimes watches these videos, would often get scared herself. Luckily she had a reason this time, and as she looked down to see her son rocking back and forth in excitement, she grew anxious about how fast he was being, but still looked cheery. "Ooh, Izuku-kun, can you not rock back and forth on that chair? We had it for almost a decade, and it's very old." Suddenly the chair snapped off when Izuku rocked back too far, causing the boy to topple backwards as 𝐀𝐦 screamed, "Izuku-kun." A few minutes later, Izuku had recovered, but now he had a bandage on his head after getting a bump on it from the fall. The desk chair was also replaced with a more normal chair that can't rock back and forth as easily as a desk chair. 𝐀𝐦 was joyful again after having a mild heart attack with seeing her son hurt. She can't stand to see her little bundle of joy hurt, or worse, and if he's fine then so is she. "Enjoy those videos, Izuku-kun." She smiled once more before leaving the room to continue cooking dinner. Izuku began to watch the first video, which was a car accident on a junction that would have killed a family of 5 if All Might didn't swoop in at the last minute and save the family. This video was said to include a rare sighting of All Might, and it was one of the few videos of him left on this site that Izuku is on, as all of them were taken down. It was an accident that could have ended in tragedy, but luckily the work of a certain symbol of peace saved the lives of Hayashi family from death. The family had this to say. The news reporter reported on the situation before interviewing the Hayashi family, who talked about how wonderful All Might was at saving their lives and how they would never forget his heroic face. With each praise All Might had gotten, Izuku had smiled and gasped in happiness. He was glad that the family were safe and even got to meet All Might. He looked down at an All Might action figure he was holding. But unfortunately, now that a giant wall was built near the town Izuku lives in, All Might isn't heard of that much anymore. And what's worse for little Izuku, some people even blamed him for doing something that was horrible. His mother said it was something called Quirk Mageddon, and that it's the reason why she doesn't use her quirk that much anymore, or why there aren't many people with quirks anymore either. He grew anxious. His father had a quirk, and he was out abroad on a business trip. What if when he comes back he gets discovered and gets taken away? Izuku doesn't want to lose his dad or his mom. He loved them very much, just as much as he loved All Might. And there you have it, another successful save brought by All Might. It was just upsetting that he wasn't here with us to give us an interview. 𝗧𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗀 on agenda. The news reporter quickly spoke in her microphone. The video would have ended there, had someone from behind the camera didn't shout. Wait, I think I can see him. A finger was pointed in front of the camera, which moved towards its direction. The camera pointed to above the building, where a large muscular man could be seen. It's him, it's All Might. Izuku looked at the video and saw the figure, who turned before jumping away as the video quickly ended. But even then, Izuku smiled at seeing All Might in the video. As the next video began to play, Izuku looked back down at the action figure again, this time looking happier than before. He wants to be a hero just like All Might. And who knows, wherever All Might is right now, Izuku will surely meet him one day, maybe when he's a hero himself. Tomorrow was the day that he was going to get an examination to see if he had a quirk, although his mother is worried for some reason when he brought it up. But Izuku didn't know why back then. But he wanted to pass. He wanted to make objects float like what his mom can do, or even breathe fire like his father. If he can do that, he can show it off at kindergarten. Tomorrow was going to be a great day for Izuku. 9/13, 19, 15, 18, 18, 25, 9, 26, 21, 11, 21. Izuku sat in the waiting room of the hospital, where he's supposed to be getting an examination. He had just finished having it, and the doctor had got the results back. But for some reason, he wanted to talk to his mother privately in his office for some reason. Izuku didn't mind. He simply sat next to the door and kicked his legs back and forth as he waited for his mother to leave the office. He looked around and noticed that there weren't many people around here for some reason. He turned towards the door to the doctor's office, where he soon began to hear the voices of the doctor that gave him the examination and his mother. You mean, he's quirkless? 𝐀𝐻's voice was heard. It was soft and calm. Yes, you do not have to worry, Miss Midoriya. Your son is 100% safe, and he won't be taken to the quirk zone. He can go on to have a great life. It's for the best he doesn't have a quirk after all. The doctor reads out the results. I know it's for the best, it's just, he really wanted to have a quirk, and I was so worried that I thought he was. Since 𝐀𝐻 didn't want to finish her sentence. I'm just not sure what to tell Izuku-kun. He'll be so disappointed. Even if he doesn't know that much about the quirk zone, he really wanted to have a quirk. She revealed to the doctor, who sounded surprised. Really? Someone wants a quirk? That's the first time I ever heard of someone wanting a quirk so badly. But unfortunately, I'm not sure what to say. Just that your son having an extra toe joint means he was lucky to be born quirkless, he stated, before he started to question 𝐀𝐻. But judging from what you just said, do you know someone that has a quirk? 𝐀𝐻 remained silent. Such as your husband, the doctor pressed for answers. Izuku then heard the sound of someone standing up, and sure enough, 𝐀𝐻 opened the door to the office and looked back at the doctor. I'm sorry, doctor, but I think this examination is over. She reached for Izuku's hand. Let's go, Izuku-kun. She grabbed her son's hand, and the two proceeded to walk down the halls and towards the main entrance of the hospital. The doctor stood by his office and reached out his hand for Izuku and 𝐀𝐻. Miss Midoriya, wait, he called to 𝐀𝐻, who ignored him as the two kept walking. Eventually, Izuku lost sight of the doctor and looked at his mother, cheerful once more after a state of confusion. Mama, what's my quirk going to be like? Am I going to lift up objects like you or breathe fire like Papa? Izuku asked. 𝐀𝐻 looked away, feeling bad. Let's just go home, Izuku-kun. She dodged the question. Izuku's smile slowly dropped. Mama, what's wrong? Did I do something wrong? He demanded answers. His mother was upset, and it made him sorrowful, because he felt like he did something bad that made her upset. Did he fail the examination? Is his mother disappointed in him? He didn't want her to feel disappointed and quickly tugged on her arm. I'm sorry, Mama. I didn't mean to disappoint you. I just want to quirk and become a hero, like you, Papa and All Might. Izuku begged for his mother's forgiveness. Izuku began to tear up, but 𝐻𝐻𝐬 stopped. Now that the two were in an empty hallway, 𝐻𝐻𝐬 could huff, tear up and fall to her knees. Izuku stopped crying and watched as his mother cried instead. Mama, Izuku slightly whimpered. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 turned, rubbing her eyes. Izuku-kun, I'm sorry. She hugged her confused son. You're not getting a quirk. You don't have one. But I don't want to say anything. I don't want to lose you, and I don't want you to be upset. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 continued to cry on her son's shoulders, who began to cry also, feeling sorry for his mother. He failed himself, and now he wasn't going to grow up to be like All Might. But right now he can't focus on that. His mother was upset. He hugged his mother, fighting through the tears. Don't be sad, Mama. I want to make you happy. He hugged back his mother, who looked back at his son. She was also fighting through her tears. If I'm going to be a hero, I want to make everyone around me happy. He spoke to his mother as the two continued to hug. He may not have a quirk, but for Izuku, he was still going to become a hero. And maybe by the time he does, then that big scary wall will be gone and more heroes, like All Might, will appear again and help him. The day after the examination, Izuku arrived for another day at kindergarten. He still felt pretty depressed about not having a quirk, which he told to his friend Miyoko a few minutes after arriving. Miyoko, knowing how much her friend wanted a quirk so badly, decided to share her lunch with him that day and give him some of the ghost cookies that she cooked with her mother. Izuku slightly perked up and Miyoko was glad. Although a few minutes later, Miyoko left to go to the bathroom, leaving Izuku alone at the bench they were sitting at. He continued to think about the examination, not noticing someone coming towards him. Hey. It sounded like a boy. Izuku was surprised to hear someone come to talk to him, as nobody in the kindergarten ever talked with him besides Miyoko and the teacher. He looked up to see the boy, who had red eyes and spiky blonde hair. He had his hands in his pockets and looked bored. But he noticed Izuku looking depressed and wanted to see if he was all right. Hello. Izuku smiled, putting his hands on his lap. Are you okay? You look pretty sad. The boy questioned. Did someone at your house die or something? The boy asked again, which surprised Izuku. What? No, why would you say that? Izuku requested answers from the boy, who shrugged. The last kindergarten I was in, one of my classmates' mom died, and he looked just as sad as you. So why are you sad? The boy wondered. It was here that Izuku realized who the boy was. This morning he was introduced to the class as a new student. I think his name was Katsuki Bakugo, and he already got into trouble a few minutes after he joined the class when he punched a kid on the nose for tugging on his hair. He wondered why someone like him was talking to him. He didn't seem like the kind of boy that would feel sorry for someone like Izuku. I don't have a quirk. I had an examination yesterday, and the doctor said that I don't have one. Izuku lamented. Katsuki felt bad and so walked over to the bench that Izuku was sitting on and sat beside him. That sucks. I think you're cool though. Katsuki turned, looking contented for Izuku. You think? I don't think anyone here likes me, except for one other person, but she's in the bathroom. Hey, do you love heroes? Izuku asked Katsuki, who smiled. Hell yeah, I love heroes. All Might is my favorite hero. In fact, I want to be just like him when I grow up. Katsuki boasted, standing on the bench beside Izuku, who pushed his hands. Be quiet, everyone can hear you. Izuku tried to stop Katsuki, who looked down at him. PFFT, screw them. They need to mind their own business. That's what my mom said. So I punched anyone that would try to say that heroes sucked or made fun of me for them. Katsuki bragged, showing off his fists to Izuku, who smiled. You're amazing, even if those people don't deserve it. You're the new kid, right? Bakugo Katsuki, Izuku asked as he stood up. Katsuki jumped down and stood in front of Izuku, his new friend. Yeah, you're actually the first person that I talked to who's not praising me for how I punched that kid in the nose. But you can call me anything else. My name isn't really all that important. He put his hands behind his hair as Izuku quickly came up with a nickname. Kaken, I think it's a great nickname. Izuku decided as Katsuki smirked. Kaken it is, Izuku-kun. Katsuki decided to call Izuku by his first name, since he felt like he and Izuku would be the best of friends, and Izuku thought so too as he continued to smile. He was glad that he made another friend, and he wished he can keep this friendship with Katsuki for a long time. Izuku dodged another rock that Katsuki had thrown to him. He laughed at how scared Izuku and another classmate of his were being scared of him despite only throwing rocks. He wanted them to grow up, but to him, Deku will never grow up. He's weak like most of the people he knows. And he said he wants to be a hero. 𝐻𝐻𝐿 𝐷, Izuku screamed in pain. A rock had managed to hit his arm, and now it was starting to bleed. Little Izuku grabbed his arm in pain as he looked back at Katsuki. 𝐻𝐻𝐿, you hit me on the arm. It has blood. He started to tear up as Katsuki smiled. Grow a pair, Deku. It's just a scar. Or are you going to cry about it again? Because you're already doing that. Katsuki smirked as Izuku whimpered. Leave him alone, 𝐻𝐻𝐿. Izuku defended his classmate, stopping Katsuki from throwing another rock at him and the classmate with glasses. Katsuki lowered the rock. Or what are you going to do? Remember I said I would stop if you just tried to punch me. He smirked as he lifted up the rock again. Of course, someone like you would never try to punch their old friend now, will you? Katsuki questioned Izuku. He was right. Izuku would never want to hurt Katsuki. Even if he hates him, Izuku still liked him, and sometimes violence was not the answer. But Katsuki was acting violent, and he needed to be stopped no matter what. You're right, I won't hurt you, 𝐻𝐻𝐿. I don't hurt my friends. Izuku stepped forward, causing Katsuki to growl. But you're hurting me. Is this what you want to do when you're older? Be a hero by hurting the ones you love. That's not a good hero, you know that. Izuku sadly reached for Katsuki's arm, trying to get him to stop so they can be friends again. He didn't understand why he stopped hanging around him. What did he do to make Katsuki hate him like this? Please, 𝐻𝐻𝐿, don't hurt us, or... Izuku began to cry again, feeling a pain in his throat. We're so arg. Suddenly Izuku was pushed on the ground by Katsuki, who ignored what he just said. But he dropped the rocks, no longer interested in throwing them at Izuku and his classmate anymore, who ran away in fear of Katsuki. 𝐻𝐻, this is pathetic. He looked down at Izuku, who looked back, trying to fight back the tears. He wanted to be brave. He can't be weak anymore, and let someone like his mother or Miyoko help him win his battles. He tried to look serious, but what Katsuki next made him fall apart emotionally for the rest of the day. Deku, we will never be friends ever again, and I want you to know that, you little shit. And no matter what, you will never become a hero. Ha! And you not having a quirk like all of those people in that zone should remind you of that, or else. Why are you even here being such a doormat to someone like me? Katsuki reminded Izuku before delivering a hard kick into his stomach. Izuku clutched his stomach, still remembering that day at the playground when he and Katsuki were 8. Those memories were brought up after the incident at school today, where Katsuki was revealed to have a quirk. Throughout the rest of the afternoon, up until he started walking home with Miyoko, Izuku was busy thinking about the incident and whether or not to keep it a secret from anyone. Miyoko turned to her friend, noticing him looking somewhat mellow, and decided to break the silence. So, I'm glad to see that you and Katsuki were safe after today, Izuku-kun. I wanted to ask, were you two all right? Miyoko asked sincerely, which snapped Izuku out of his train of thought. Huh. He turned to Miyoko and slightly smiled. Oh yeah, nothing major happened. Izuku began to sweat, wondering whether or not to lie to Miyoko, who was suspicious after hearing that Izuku and Katsuki were at the area where the wall at the side of the school exploded from. Except, she wanted for Izuku to finish. Me and 𝐻𝐻𝐿 just had a civilized conversation, and he returned me the notebook. We both went our separate ways shortly before the wall exploded, thankfully. Izuku smiled brightly again, looking glad, although on the inside, he was upset that he had to lie to Miyoko. Then again, it would just be one little lie, and it was to protect Katsuki. Sure, Miyoko was his friend and Katsuki's, but he didn't want what he saw to get out to public. Or else, Katsuki will be taken away, just like his friends. Miyoko slightly frowned. Well, I'm happy that you and Katsuki-kun are okay. I knew I should have given you that charm instead of waiting for tomorrow. Miyoko perked up, but it only got Izuku curious. Charm, he asked, wanting to know more about the charm. I was saving it as a gift for the anniversary of when we first met tomorrow. Don't you remember, at the playground where our moms arranged a playdate? Miyoko questioned. Izuku thought back, and remembered the first day he and Miyoko had first met. His mother had befriended Miyoko's mother, while out shopping one day, and Miyoko's mother agreed that her daughter needed more friends. So Inko took Izuku to his favorite playground where the playdate was to be held. It was hard for Izuku to find Miyoko at first, but he did find her sitting by a swing. She was cheerful and fine when Izuku walked up to her, and even asked if he wanted to sit beside her. The two spent the entire day at the park, talking about heroes, the occult, and how Izuku wanted to be a hero when they grew up. There were some incidents here and there, like how Izuku got his shirt stuck on the slide, which Miyoko helped him with, and Miyoko herself falling in a small pond and having a panic attack. Luckily, Izuku risked getting his little shoes wet to help his new friend get out of the pond. But ever since that day that they met, Izuku and Miyoko have been best friends, and were soon joined by Katsuki, sometime after they started kindergarten. Tomorrow was the anniversary of that playdate in which the two would spend the entire day hanging out. Miyoko seemed to want to give Izuku a gift that she made. She reached into her pocket, and as she did, Izuku noticed something on Miyoko's arm that wasn't there this morning. It was a friendship bracelet. He wondered who gave it to her. Maybe it was Katsuki, as after all, when Izuku left the school he had saw Miyoko and Katsuki talk by the gate before Katsuki walked off. He decided not to ask Miyoko about the bracelet for now as she took out the charm, which was yellow and had a small figure at the middle. It appeared to resemble All Might. Tada! It's an All Might charm. I found out how to make these sorts of things a few weeks ago, and I wanted to give it to you tomorrow. Miyoko showed the charm to Izuku, who gasped excitingly as she placed the charm on his hand. Miyoko-chan, this is amazing, thank you. He looked up as Miyoko smiled. So what about my present? Izuku suddenly screamed, realizing that he doesn't have anything to give for Miyoko tomorrow. She laughed. Just messing with you. It's okay, Izuku-kun. Us hanging together will be an all-right gift for me. Miyoko then pointed towards the charm. But that charm is also a protection item, she pointed out, but Izuku was confused. Protection? He questioned Miyoko, who answered. You know, to protect you from criminals and people like Katsuki-kun, she revealed, but she looked slightly concerned. Hey, Izuku-kun, can I ask you something? Since we're getting near the end of this road. Miyoko and Izuku slightly looked at the end of the path they were on in the neighborhood. Was Katsuki-kun sad when you got your notebook back from him today? She asked Izuku, who stopped, curious. And no? He was angry at best. But we had a normal conversation, and I got my notebook back, which I don't want you to see, as it's currently drying off. Izuku played with his hair. Yeah, you're right. It's probably nothing. He was just, when I talked to him by the school gates half an hour ago, he looked like he was going to burst into tears. Miyoko sounded worried, hoping Katsuki was okay with the situation he might be dealing with. Izuku looked dismal as well. Something was bothering 𝐀𝐦. Izuku grew concerned. What if Katsuki was anxious that someone was watching him when he used his quirk? He must be, and he would surely be worried that someone like Izuku would tell someone of his quirk. But if he thought about doing so, then Katsuki would try and beat him up back then. Hopefully, things will just go back to normal the day after. Maybe the quirk patrol officers won't bat an eye about the wall and search elsewhere. Soon enough, Izuku and Miyoko had reached the end of the street. Katsuki-kun was looking upset when I talked to him by the gate, that was all. He just looked very bothered by something. Miyoko looked away, showing just so much concern as Izuku. Hopefully it's nothing serious. He tried to reassure his friend, who nodded. Say, where do you want to meet up tomorrow? I'm guessing at my house since your parents might be in. Izuku remembered seeing Miyoko's parents in the past. They weren't exactly kind to him or 𝐀𝐦, and often when Miyoko was around them she would look dismal. So going to her house tomorrow was out of the question. Yeah, we can go there, Izuku-kun. My parents will be busy all day at the law firm tomorrow, so the house will be empty. But I did want to see your room. Is it true it's decorated with All Might stuff? Miyoko almost said junk, but that would be rude for her to say. More so, she wanted to be kind to Izuku's hobbies as he laughed. Yeah, almost everything All Might related. There's still an All Might bobblehead that I need to get, but unfortunately, it's very rare to find. Izuku looked down at the charm and decided to put it around his arm. He smiled again at Miyoko, liking the charm she had just given him. I'm sure you'll find it. You're pretty much probably the only person in this side of Japan who's still a fan of All Might, Izuku-kun. Miyoko looked at behind Izuku, at the path where her home was. I should get going. My parents will freak out if I'm out at night. Miyoko moved past Izuku and began to make her own way home, but Izuku turned. Say, Miyoko-chan. He called out to Miyoko, who stopped and turned, looking curious. Yeah, Izuku-kun, she asked. Thank you for supporting my dream. A lot of people don't think I can become a hero. But you and my mother, you're probably the only two who believe that I can achieve my dream into becoming a hero. So, thank you. You've been a great friend, and I can't wait to hang out tomorrow. He smiled, as did Miyoko, who was glad to be Izuku's friend as well. Of course, Izuku-kun. We'll always be best friends. And you will be a great hero one day. And with that, Izuku went down the other path to his home, while Miyoko went down on the other, turning away and walking away from each other. Izuku felt elated from this walk home today, and he felt like nothing could ruin it. However, these next few minutes will end up changing the life of Izuku Midoriya. And it all started with some shouting coming from a classmate of Izuku's. "Leave me the fuck alone," cried Katsuki in front of Izuku, who looked up after looking down at his new charm again. "Huh, Kekken." He ran forward to see a small crowd of residents gathering around Quirk patrol officers, the same ones from this morning at school. They were aiming their tasers at one resident of this neighborhood that they were sent to collect after a girl gave them some evidence pointing to him having a quirk, and his name was Bakugo Katsuki. "Relax, kid. We're just here to take you to the Quirk Zone before you do anything that could put these residents in harm's way." One of the female officers tried to calm Katsuki, but there was no way that boy was going to be taken in by officers that easily. Izuku pushed his way through the crowd, apologizing in the process, to be met by his fears. Katsuki was going to be taken to the Quirk Zone. He was confused. He thought he was the only one that witnessed Katsuki use his quirk. How did the officers know? The woman held up a phone, which showed the confrontation between Katsuki and Izuku, and the scene where Katsuki had raised his hand and shot an explosive blast towards Izuku. An anonymous student at your school had recorded this. It clearly shows you using a quirk to try and hurt this boy. Ignoring the fact that you used your quirk, you were using it to hurt a student. She lowered the phone and smirked towards the angered Katsuki. "In which case, you're coming with us before you try to hurt another person." She crossed her arms. The three officers behind her were holding tasers in case Katsuki tried to leave. "Fuck you, that wasn't me. I'm not going with you freaks anywhere," he yelled, clutching his arms and trying his best not to sweat so he can use his quirk. But the stress of the situation, it was quickly getting to Katsuki. "Kekken." It only got worse for Katsuki when he noticed Deku from the crowd. He moved forward as the officers turned towards the boy. "Stay back, kid. This boy is dangerous. He might use his quirk at any second." One of the male officers tried to push Izuku back. "But he's my classmate. He doesn't have a quirk," he tried to defend Katsuki. "We have evidence, kid. I'm sorry, but your classmate needs to be taken to the Quirk Zone. It's illegal for someone." The male officer turned towards Katsuki, who growled, "For someone like him to be wandering around this side of Japan. Don't worry. You can visit your friend during Quirk Day or any time by simply visiting him. He's not my friend," Katsuki retorted to the officer. Izuku felt hurt, but he wasn't going to let Katsuki be taken away. He doesn't deserve to be taken to the Quirk Zone. Who knows what goes on there? And more so, what will Miyoko and his parents think with the fact that they won't see him ever again? He wasn't going to let that happen. "Let me through." He tried to get past the officer, only for one of the female officers to walk towards Izuku and push him to the ground in front of the crowd of concerned residents of the neighborhood. "Stay back," she warned. Katsuki meanwhile tried to back away from the officers and make a getaway. He looked down and realized that he started to sparkle from his sweat. He tried to stop his quirk, but he couldn't. The only thing he could do now was run and make it back home. Hopefully, those officers won't follow him, but they will try and track him down, and maybe take his parents as well if they find his house. As Katsuki continued to back away, he didn't notice the can of soda that was lying on the ground behind him. He got closer to it, until he accidentally kicked it, causing everyone to turn towards Katsuki and realized he was getting away. "He's getting away," one of the male officers yelled as they charged towards Katsuki. "And look, his arms," a resident pointed out in horror as Katsuki looked down. "Oh shit," was the last thing that Katsuki had remarked before the officers came at him. Katsuki was quickly tackled and yelled out as his arms were pulled back to be cuffed. "Kekken." Izuku stood up, tearing up. He wasn't going to see his classmate again. He couldn't let that happen. As the officers slowly lifted Katsuki up, he tried to hold in the pain his arms were giving him. As he did, he saw Izuku running towards him, only to stop him. "Deku, stay back," he warned. He was scared, but he didn't want Izuku harmed in his mess. Izuku should be happy. Katsuki was going to disappear from his life. He wasn't going to beat him up and call him weak or pathetic anymore. And he wasn't alone, as he still had Miyoko. So, why was he crying at this fact? As Katsuki was pulled back, he dropped his bag and towards an alleyway, thinking about what the Quirk Zone will be like. And his old friends, are they even still alive? Will they even remember someone like Katsuki? And Miyoko, he didn't have time to say goodbye to her or his parents. He knew this might have happened, that when he used his quirk today to attack Deku, that his time in this side of Japan was almost up. It felt like this was going to be his last day before he was outed to the public. And even then, his fears came true. People now know he has a quirk. And as he was pulled away towards a Quirk Patrol fan at an alleyway, he could hear them gossiping already. But the only thing he could do is look down and be furious at how much he was a fool in exposing his quirk because of his stupid anger. That's Mitsuki's child. I didn't know he had a quirk. At least he's gone now, before he could hurt my child. Freaks like them make me sick. I want him to suffer for being such a brat. Izuku looked at the crowd and saw Katsuki being dragged out of his view. As the officers started to walk away into the alleyway, Izuku clutched his heart. He needed to do something, no matter what. Katsuki didn't want to go to the Quirk Zone. He was in trouble. But those officers were just doing their job. A job that isn't right. He has to stop them from taking Katsuki away. He has to save Kaken. Kaken, Izuku yelled to the top of his lungs as he raced towards the alleyway and ran towards the officers, who had opened the back of the van to throw Katsuki in when they noticed Izuku. He charged as fast as he could towards the nearest officer, one of the male ones, with his fist held high in the air. Izuku didn't know why he needed to punch one of the officers. It was just the first thing that came into his mind, as after all, the officers are again just doing their job. But they have Katsuki, his childhood best friend. He felt as if All Might was in this situation, he would do the same thing. He needed to do what was right and help Katsuki, and as his fist neared the officer's face, he heard the voices of the ones he loved and cared for him, cheering him on, remembering the good times he had with them. Izuku-kun, I'm proud of you. You're going to grow up to be an amazing hero. The warm, gentle voice of Inko had spoken to him when he was little and first talked about wanting to become a hero. She never gave up in believing her son and knew that no matter what, her son would grow up to achieve his dream. Izuku-kun, thank you for being there for me. This horrible day has gotten better now that you're here. It's stuff like this that's going to make you into a great hero. He remembered how he cheered the depressed Miyoko's day one time when things between her parents became too much. She was the only person in his class that believes in him. No matter what everyone else thinks, she stood by his side, and he stood by hers. When she needed to cry, Izuku was her shoulder, and when he needed to cry, Miyoko was his. Midoriya-kun, you too can become a hero. Okay, this one didn't really happen. But Izuku imagined if All Might hung around with him, he would cheer him on and believes he will become a hero. He always believed that anyone can become heroes. Unfortunately, he knew that All Might would never want to hang around with someone like him. Izuku-kun, let's never drift apart. Let's become heroes together. Finally, he remembered how he had his first playdate with Katsuki. He stated this to him at the end of the day. When they were about to leave, he, like Izuku, had the same dream, which was to become heroes like they were during the Golden Age, before Quirk Mageddon. But sadly, Katsuki back then was wrong. They did drift away, but even if Katsuki got tired of Izuku, Izuku did not let him go. Izuku slammed his fist as hard as he could into the officer's face, causing the officer to fall back as the other three officers and Katsuki looked on, surprised that someone like him did such a thing. Izuku had smashed his fist so hard into the officer's face that Izuku's knuckles were now sore, and the officer's nose was bleeding badly. He sat up and held his nose, but looked up at the boy that assaulted him, who breathed heavily as he looked down at the officer. Please, don't take Kaken away. He started to tear up. He doesn't deserve to be taken away, he pleaded. The officer didn't say anything, feeling sorry for the boy. But one of the female officers spoke in an emotionless tone. That boy has a quirk. Take him in. The other two officers nodded. They readied their tasers and walked towards Izuku. But before Izuku could say anything else, a hard smack from one of the officer's tasers quickly sent him backwards onto the ground. And Izuku's view turned dark after that. Izuku was surrounded by darkness for a while now, barely remembering everything that just happened, only that he had to jump in and save Katsuki. Then someone had hit him, and it was strong enough to knock him out. Now Izuku could hear the sound of grumbling, something that was moving below him, and a sharp pain coming from the back of his head. Most likely the spot where he was hit in the head. But as the darkness began to clear around Izuku, he slowly opened his eyes. He was met by a white roof in what appeared to be a dimly lit room. Izuku could feel the ground moving from below him as he slowly sat up, clutching the back of his head in pain as he began to rub it. It was fortunate that he wasn't hit so hard that his head was bleeding. Like Izuku would need an injury like that now that he's in a dangerous situation. Izuku looked around and saw someone at the back of the room. It was 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿, who was kicking what appeared to be a door to the back of a van. It was here that Izuku realized where he was. He wasn't in some room. He was in the back of a van that was being driven to the Quirk zone, where the officers driving the van are going to throw Izuku and 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿 in. Izuku slightly panicked, not knowing what goes on in the Quirk zone. What if someone tries to kill him 5 minutes after entering? 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿 can clearly defend himself with his quirk. But there's no way that he was going to jump in and save Izuku like what Izuku did to him. "Let me the fuck out of here." 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿 kicked the van door, demanding to break free from the hell he was about to be put in. It wasn't fair. He wasn't supposed to be here. Kakakin. Izuku slowly stood up, no longer rubbing the back of his head. 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿 quickly turned. Are we being taken to the Quirk zone?" Izuku asked, sounding fearful in his voice. 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿 ignored his question. Instead, he ran up towards him. "Deku, you fucking piece of shit." He reached and grabbed onto Izuku's school jacket and slammed him onto the nearest wall he can find. Izuku couldn't react and was quickly grabbed. He yelped in pain as he was slammed by the wall, with 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿's free hand being pointed at his face, threatening to engulf him with an explosion. 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿 didn't want to use his quirk in this van, as there was a high chance that the van could crash and easily kill him. But seeing Izuku, who he was stuck with, pissed him off. He didn't care if he crashed this van and die, as long as he didn't see Izuku anymore. "Why?" 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿 demanded Izuku's answer, who was left confused. "Why?" Izuku began to sweat, worried that 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿 will fire his quirk any minute. 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿 tightened his grip on Izuku, who was now struggling to breathe. "Why the fuck did you risk your life just to save someone who hates your guts?" 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿 loosened, wanting to give Izuku some breathing room. Izuku clutched his neck. I didn't want them to hurt you, 𝐀𝐻𝐿. Who knows what goes in the Quirk zone if they take you there? Then we would never see you again, and your life, it would be in danger." Izuku revealed his reasons to 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿, who backed away and looked down at his arms. "But it was useless. Now I'm being taken to the Quirk zone as well." Izuku slid down on the ground as 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿 sighed. "No, you're not." Izuku looked up. "Eh? But those officers think I have a quirk." Izuku began to scratch the back of his neck, feeling a slight pain from it now. That was when he felt a bit of liquid touch his fingers. He moved his hand to the front of his face to see what it was. It was blood, his blood, only a little bit of blood. But Izuku was confused. Why was his neck bleeding? "𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐿, is your neck bleeding?" Izuku looked back at 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿, who nodded. "They took a blood sample from both of us, which they said they were going to test to see if we actually have quirks when we get to the border." 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿 slid down afar from Izuku, looking away. "They clearly know I already have a quirk. But once they test your blood and find that you're obviously negative, they're just going to throw you back to 𝗬𝗲𝗏. At least you can go back." He glared briefly to Izuku, who gulped. "𝐻𝐻𝐿, we're going to get out of this. We're going to escape and get back to our family and friends." Izuku hoped, but this only caused 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿 to grow furious. Not as furious as before, but enough to prompt him to snap back. "I'm never going to go back," he suddenly yelled, his eyes becoming bloodshot as he clenched his hands, that were slowly throbbing in fear for what was to come. "Don't you fucking get it? I'm going to be thrown into that zone, either way. I'm never going to see you, Miyako-chan, and maybe my parents again. I'll probably never find my old friends either. They're probably dead in the zone as we speak, and I'll be joining them soon enough." 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿 growled. "Nobody will care either way." A tear began to form from 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿's eye, as did Izuku's, who felt bad. He never knew that 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿 had this fear. He must have gotten this fear when he first got his quirk. 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿 wiped away his tear. "Nobody in 𝗬𝗏𝗏 will care that I'm gone. They see me as a delinquent." 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿 raised his fist. A mistake. He forced his fist at the wall beside him, threatening to break it. But he didn't care. He just didn't care. Nothing mattered anymore. Nobody will care if 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿 went to the Quirk zone. And the only 3 people that will care, he may never see again. And it pissed him off. He wanted to beat someone up. He wanted to beat those Quirk officers up for taking him to the zone. He didn't want to go. He didn't want to become a prisoner like other people with quirks. 𝐻𝐻𝐻𝐿. Izuku moved forward, slightly fearful that 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿 would punch him. But he didn't. He didn't even turn to look at Deku, nor answer him, once Izuku was sitting in front of him. Izuku wiped away his own tears. "You don't have to feel alone in all of this, not anymore. We will get through this together. We won't be separated." He held out his hand, as 𝐻𝐡𝐻𝐿 turned and looked down at Izuku's hand, which opened. Izuku weakly smiled. I want to make everyone I know happy, and I'm going to make you happy, like a true hero, Izuku warmly stated. But Katsuki wasn't showing signs of being happy, not anytime soon. Instead, he just slapped Izuku's hand away from him. I don't need your fucking pity, Katsuki coldly stated to Izuku, who rubbed his hand before looking back at Katsuki. Feeling bad for not being able to help him, it was hurting Izuku inside, as was his current situation. Kaken. Izuku rubbed his eyes, just as the door to the back of the van began to open. Izuku gasped and turned, as did Katsuki, as the two quickly stood up when they saw the 4 Quirk patrol officers pointing tasers at them. You two, out of the van, now, ordered one of the female officers. Izuku quickly followed, with Katsuki following behind, having no choice but to do so, as he would be shot to bits if he tried to use his explosions to defend himself. Izuku and Katsuki jumped out of the van, and the officers looked around at the two, wanting to see if they had anything on them. It was here that they noticed the friendship bracelet on Katsuki and the All Might charm on Izuku. Those things, take them off now and give them to us, one of the female officers demanded, confusing the two boys. What? Izuku yelled in shock. What the fuck? I'm not giving you this. It's very personal to me, dipshit. Katsuki spat back to the Quirk officer, who grew sullen. Don't let me have to smack you, kid. For all we know, that bracelet and charm could have a secret weapon or chemical inside that could be dangerous, the female officer explained. But Izuku stepped forward in front of Katsuki. And throwing people into this zone to fend for themselves is not. Izuku continued to yell, making one of the male officers feel bad and place a hand on the female officer that was standing in front of Izuku and Katsuki. Listen, we should just leave those things alone. They're right. I don't think they're going to carry anything in those bracelets, the male officer tried to reassure his partner, who turned. We can never be sure, especially from that blonde freak. She pointed to Katsuki, who got pissed off by that remark. A freak. A fucking freak. Katsuki held out his hand, only for the officers to raise their batons, threatening to harm Katsuki. Izuku shook his head. Kaken. And before Izuku could finish, however, an alarm went off, causing the 6 to look around. Izuku and Katsuki were confused. What the fuck? Katsuki calmed down, and that was only because he wanted to know why that alarm was going on. Is that an alarm? What's it for? Izuku turned back towards the officers. One of them muttered. Someone's trying to escape the zone. The 6 looked up, after hearing the screams of a distressed man coming from the top of the wall. Izuku and Katsuki's eyes widened at the sight of the man. He was shirtless and wearing black pants, but he was exhausted. They couldn't see clearly, but there were smudges of red all over him and his quirk, a giant pair of angel wings that were large. The man was injured, as he needed to get away from them. He slipped and fell from the wall towards the ground, clearly looking dizzy. We got a quirk jumper, one of the officers told through a radio, as Izuku and Katsuki gasped. He's going to fall, Izuku pointed out. Shit. Katsuki quietly cursed, feeling sorry for the man. That is, until he flew forward, past the 6 and above the woods near the border. Shots were quickly fired nearby from other officers that were patrolling the border. Izuku, Katsuki, and the officers quickly kneeled down for safety, as they watched as one of the bullets punctured the man's wound, causing the wounds on his angelic wings to grow larger and expose the bones that were supporting the weight of the man's quirk. The man sweated in pain, but kept flying, wanting to get away from the quirk zone and to be alone. Izuku and Katsuki could only look on in horror by the blood that was dripping from his wings and body. He's getting away. Shit. It's going to cause problems in 𝐻𝐻𝐻 if he flies there, one of the female quirk officers pointed out. The other female officer took out her radio and began to shout a command through it. Bring the figureheads to where the man is. He needs to be dealt with, she commanded before putting away the radio. Izuku and Katsuki turned, confused by what she meant. 5 figureheads? Izuku was confused. You mean, those weird things in the sky? Katsuki wondered. The 4 officers simply nodded as officers around the border stopped firing and waited for the arrival of them. The man continued to fly, relieved that they were not shooting at him anymore. He was safe. He was out of the zone. He was free. That is, until he heard something. Well, something's around him, which brought fear back into his body again. He looked around, wanting to know what the noise was, and that was when he quickly saw it. The purple mist. It was a fast mist that was flying around the man's view. It moved closer and closer, and as much as the man wanted to fly away from the mist, it just kept getting closer, no matter how hard he tried to avoid it. He began to breathe heavily, as he continued to fly as fast as he could. But the pain coming from his wings, it was too hard to bear. He began to cry, knowing that if they catch him, they're going to hand him over to them. They're going to kill him, or worse. He didn't want to die. He needed to be safe. He needed to see his parents one last time, and tell them how he loves them. A large shadow quickly covered the man, and as he turned, he saw it. The figureheads. And before the man could scream, he suddenly vanished from the sky, as did the purple mist, to deliver the man to love so he can be punished. Izuku and 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐭 were confused with what just happened, as the two were escorted towards a large door to the Quirk border. That man, what happened to him? Is he dead? Izuku asked one of the officers, who jabbed the tip of his baton to Izuku's back, which pissed 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐭 off. "Hey, don't do that," 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐭 yelled in response to the officer's actions. One of the officers soon took out an ID and placed it at the side of the door, allowing it to open and allowing the six to enter the border. They would soon enter a dimly lit and dirty hall, with the last thing Izuku and 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐭 would hear from the outside of the quirkless side of Japan was an answer to Izuku's question. He's gone to a better place. Well, not better, but a place where freaks like them get punished for trying to leave the zone. Don't ever try to be like him. One of the officers warned Izuku and 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐭. As the door to the Quirk border slowly closed from behind the six, Izuku and 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐭 gave one last look of the quirkless side of Japan, and the many memories they had from there. Of their friends, their families. It dawned on the two that they might not see their families again. It pained them very much. And alas, everything and everyone that knew Midoriya Izuku and Bakugo 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐭 were now locked away behind a large steel door. And so begins the boys' new life in the Quirk Zone. 9/2019 January 12, 12/25 15/21 18/6 1/21 12/20 Shortly after entering the border, Izuku and 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐭 were led into a well-lit white room, and were told to wait until a video at the middle of the room would play. When the door closed and locked from behind Izuku and 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐭, they looked around at the room. The only thing noticeable in the room were dozens of chairs all lined around a large TV in the center of the room. What unnerved Izuku and 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐭 were what was on the chairs. There appeared to be collars. 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐭 suddenly felt very uncomfortable. "I'm not wearing these fucking dog collars." He kicked one chair and collar over and looked up from the room. "You hear me, Deku can, but I'm not some sort of dog you can toy around with, you sick fucks," 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐭 yelled. Izuku was not impressed. "Kaken, calm down. Maybe when someone comes into the room, we can talk to them. A talking is not going to fucking work, Deku." He briefly turned to Izuku. "When are you going to get that over your stupid little skull, that these officers are not going to listen to us?" 𝐻𝐡𝐬𝐭 clenched his fist. He wanted to blow up this room. Although he would probably be executed if he did so, and he can't do that now. Soon a flash filled the room, briefly blinding Izuku and 𝐻𝐡𝐭. The two yelped in pain as they tried to cover their eyes, and leaving their necks open to have the collars quickly placed onto them by Quirk patrol officers that had entered the room. The boys felt a sudden cold sensation around their necks, as Izuku touched his collar and gasped. "The collar, it's on me." He slightly panicked. 𝐻𝐡𝐭 just grew irritated when he felt his collar, and started to do a punching motion to anyone nearby. "What the fuck? Who did this? Show yourselves." He moved his arms off of his eyes, which were fine now that the blinding light was gone, as were Izuku's. The boys were again the only two in the room, the officers having quickly left when the light turned off. 𝐻𝐡𝐭 turned and walked to the door, and aimed his hand, preparing to use his quirk to blow it open. But Izuku felt like that something bad will happen to him if he did that. "Kaken, don't do it. I have a feeling these collars will go crazy if you try to use your quirk." He tried to warn 𝐻𝐡𝐭, who grinned and looked back. "Fucking watch me. I don't care if these collars shock me. I'm getting out of here no matter what. I had enough of this place already." 𝐻𝐡𝐭 prepared his quirk, when suddenly, the TV in the middle of the room turned on. 𝐻𝐡𝐭 stopped and turned towards the TV. He was confused at the woman on the screen. She was wearing the kind of clothes that a stewardess on a plane would wear, complete with a light blue hat. She was oddly cheerful for some reason as she began to talk. "Hello, my name is Yuki. I will be your Quirk Zone guide today, or tonight if the sun is going down, or if it's already night at the border you have been taken to." She smiled as she moved to reveal something beside her. It was a projector screen which she pointed at. Izuku and 𝐻𝐡𝐭 decided to watch the program, as maybe it can help them get a better understanding of the Quirk Zone, although 𝐻𝐡𝐭 wasn't enjoying it so far. He leaned away, wanting the movie to be over with already. "Now if you have been taken to the Quirk border, then there are two reasons for this. Yuki explained as the first picture appeared in the projector, which showed a woman being held back by Quirk patrol officers as her husband is being dragged away towards a truck. The first reason is pretty obvious, is that you have been exposed to having a quirk in public. Reason number 2, and according to our research, a rarity these days. A second image began to appear, showing the man and woman reunited in front of the quirk border. You're here to visit a loved one that has been sent to a quirk zone. You are free to enter the quirk zone whenever you want, free of charge, or you can wait until a special holiday called Quirk Day to happen, Yuki revealed. Izuku was confused about the holiday. Quirk Day? Izuku scratched his head. She obviously means that people with quirks can leave the quirk zone, most likely for a day. Katsuki guessed, which Yuki soon explained was the same thing, meaning Katsuki's guess was right. He grinned when he realized he can easily predict what happens in this movie. Although do be aware, visitors, if you stay in the quirk zone for more than one day, they will be serious repercussions, Yuki explained. Although it's legal for quirkless citizens to stay in the zone for more than one day, we hastily advise coming back in under 1 day. Failure will result in you becoming an unperson at the quirkless side of Japan, she revealed. Izuku gulped. Katsuki again didn't care. Which means your identity will be erased as if you were never born on this normal side of Japan. But don't worry, you'll still be a person in the quirk zone, and you will be punished like a regular quirk person if you do try to leave the zone. So again, please don't stay for more than 1 day. Yuki held her hands together before moving to the next topic. Back on the main topic at hand, if you do have a quirk, and that was the reason you were sent here, then your answer to living in the quirk zone is simple. Yuki continued to smile. There is none. Katsuki's eyes widened, and he leaned forward. What the fuck does she mean? He crunched his teeth. And please, Yuki continued, if you have our love-supported collars currently around your neck, then it is advised you do not use your quirk. Otherwise you will end up like actor Yukihiro Kitani's character in the critically acclaimed Bloodbath Battle Royale. Yuki continued to smile. Izuku thought back about the movie, and realized what happened to that actor's character in that movie. He gasped in horror, wondering how many people in this border suffered the same fate. Katsuki was confused by what she meant. Clearly, haven't seen the movie. I don't get it. He showed his confusion, but Izuku turned and shakes his head at him. Just don't use your quirk no matter what, until these collars are removed, Izuku warned Katsuki. And with that, you are ready to be taken to the quirk zone. Please, wait until the quirk officer comes back to escort you out of the border. I hope you enjoyed this movie. Yuki started to wave goodbye to the people watching the movie. Izuku wanted to wave goodbye, but he felt as if Katsuki will punch him for getting too invested in the short movie. Once the movie ended, 2 quirk patrol officers soon entered the room, with one of them carrying a clipboard. Izuku and Katsuki turned and stood up, Katsuki looking as bitter as before. So, did you two enjoy the movie? One of the officers asked. Katsuki snapped back. No, let us go, he demanded as the officer holding the board spoke next. Relax, kid, you'll be released soon, both of you will. He revealed. Izuku began to look distraught. What? But I don't have a quirk, I can't go into the zone, he pleaded as the officer held up the clipboard. Well, according to the blood test reports, you appear to have something in your bloodstream, and to us, that's a reason to throw you into the lion's den with the rest of the freaks. He handed Izuku the clipboard. Izuku grabbed it, and together he and Katsuki looked at the report they did on Izuku, although nothing was out in the ordinary. There was one detail on the report that surprised Izuku and Katsuki, and that was Izuku's quirk status. Quirk was what it said. Izuku looked up. That's wrong, it should be saying none. He handed the clipboard back to the officer and pointed at his chest. I had an examination when I was 4 like everyone else. The doctor said that I didn't have a quirk. He kept pointing at his chest. I don't know what's in my bloodstream, but I know that it's not related to me having a quirk. He finished as Katsuki looked away, not wanting to get into this drama. We don't care, the officer holding the clipboard stated as the other officer held up his baton at the 2. You're coming with us now, he demanded. Izuku began to tear up, but had no choice but to follow the officers out of the room with Katsuki. He realized that he was never going to go back to Iwata. With Katsuki, he was going to be in an unknown place, filled with people with amazing powers, but his friends, his family. Miyoko. Mom. He's never going to see them again. He wanted to cry, but he couldn't. He was scared that he would get hurt. Izuku and Katsuki were soon led out into a wooded area outside of the border. They were now at the other side. They were inside of the Quirk zone. Upon taking a few steps out of the zone, Izuku and Katsuki were pushed onto the ground. Izuku and Katsuki cried out in pain as Katsuki turned towards the officers, who proceeded to remove the collars off of them. "Fucking watch it." He coughed back at the two officers who looked down at the two. "Whatever, you two are on your own now. We're turning a blind eye to what you'll freaks do in here starting now. Enjoy your new life." The two officers then proceeded to turn and walk towards the border. Katsuki stood up. "You're going to fucking pay for what you're doing, you hear me?" he yelled as the officer turned back one last time. "And if you try to use your quirk, I won't hesitate to snap a dumbass 14-year-old's neck before he could use his quirk," the officer threatened, making Katsuki unsettled. The two officers finally entered the border again, leaving Izuku and Katsuki alone to fend for themselves. Katsuki, realizing that he was now alone, growled and looked down at Izuku, giving him a glare before putting his hand into his pockets and walking into the woods in front of him and Izuku, knowing it was useless to try and fight the border. Izuku quickly sat up and turned to Katsuki. "𝐀𝐦, wait, we need to stick together." Izuku stood up. Katsuki ignored him, so Izuku just followed him into the woods, much to the boy's chagrin. Izuku pushed through the bushes of leaves that Katsuki had pushed behind him to slow Izuku down. "I know you're trying to avoid me, but we're in a quirk zone. We have to be careful or else." Suddenly Katsuki turned and grabbed Izuku. "Show it to me, now," Katsuki demanded. "Show what?" Izuku was confused, but Katsuki responded by dragging Izuku towards the center of the woods and throwing him towards a lake. He didn't exactly land in the lake, just in front of it. And as Izuku looked and saw the glittering waters, he was met by a swift kick to the stomach, which caused him to cry out in pain. Katsuki looked down at him. "I know you have a fucking quirk. Why else were you sent out here with me? They would have thrown you back at Iwata by now. But instead, I'm stuck here with you." Katsuki placed a leg on Izuku's back, preventing him from moving. Izuku coughed and looked up to Katsuki. "Kaken, I don't know what they mean. I swear to you, I don't have a quirk. I would have been using it by now if I did. I always wanted to have a quirk, just like you," Izuku pleaded, but it just made Katsuki even angrier. "You want to be a disaster like me? Having to not use your quirk and feel like an outcast to society?" He tightened his foot on Izuku's back. "You don't understand the shit I have to go through to keep this secret, Deku." Katsuki shot a blast of explosion towards the lake, near a boat that was in the middle of the lake. Izuku and Katsuki didn't pay it any mind. Instead, Katsuki needed to teach Izuku a lesson, who sat up. "Kaken, please, we don't have to leave each other." Izuku sniffed. Meanwhile on the boat, someone was watching the two. The man was annoyed that two people, who appear to be teenagers, were out in a lake this late at night. And just when he thought he would get away from those pro-heroes too. The man, 𝐸𝐸 as he likes to be called, was an octopus-like person, whose quirk makes him act like an octopus. He leaned down, making sure that the two didn't see him like they would care, as Izuku and Katsuki were caught up in their own drama, to notice 𝐸𝐸, who was on the run in the zone for trying to smuggle cocaine from one of the chaotic countries in the world. This was a dark time the world was facing after all. Even if Japan has officially recovered from the effects of Quirk Mageddon, people still needed a bit of a pick-me-up now and again, especially those who are locked away in this zone, like 𝐸𝐸. He looked back at Izuku and Katsuki, guessing the two had quirks. I mean, why else would they be out here in the middle of the night? It's dangerous for people like them to be out here this late. Oh well, I guess they should be dealt a lesson in trying to snoop in other people's businesses. They seem too much, 𝐸𝐸 thought, before jumping into the lake and swimming rapidly towards the boys. Katsuki looked down at Izuku one last time, as he was preparing to leave to go his own way. "I don't need anyone, especially someone like you leeching around me, Deku. The only good thing about this zone is that once I'm gone, you won't have to see me again." He grinned, joyful at this revelation, much to Izuku's sadness. And then a look of horror crossed his face, which Katsuki had noticed. "What are you freaking out about now?" he asked as Izuku slowly pointed downwards towards one of Katsuki's leg. He looked down. Katsuki looked at the appendage that clutched his leg before he could do anything. 𝐸𝐸 appeared from the waters of the lake and threw Katsuki into the water behind him. "Bon voyage," 𝐸𝐸 laughed, already enjoying tormenting these two junior high school students. "Kaken." Izuku stood up and raced towards the lake, only for 𝐸𝐸 to launch another arm towards Izuku's face, whacking him and sending him back on the ground that he was lying down. "Save your tears, kid. 𝐴𝐻𝐸 suddenly got enraged. But he used the appendage that he hit Izuku's face with to wrap around one of Izuku's legs and pull him high into the sky. "I'll deal with you soon enough," he taunted Izuku. He was holding him upside down as Izuku looked down, frightened for his life, which was at stake now that he was being held at such a tall height. "Why are you doing this? Please leave us alone," Izuku begged, clamping his heads together for 𝐴𝐻𝐸 to see. The octopus man wasn't having it. "You saw my boat. Do you know what's in that thing? Drugs," 𝐴𝐻𝐸 yelled at the top of his lungs. Izuku let go of his appendage and didn't look amused. "We didn't know that, nor did we even care about that boat. We probably would have left without even caring about that boat in a few minutes," Izuku pointed out. It took 𝐴𝐻𝐸 a few seconds to realize this, and he groaned in anger. "Fu-oo-ook," he punched the ground with one of his spare arms. But then he realized something, which caused him to smirk and turn upwards towards Izuku. "But now you know. So now I have a reason to kill both you and your friend over there." He pointed towards the lake. �𝐾𝐻𝐸 still hasn't emerged yet from the lake. Until a hand suddenly rose from the water, and a blast of explosion was suddenly shot towards one of 𝐴𝐻𝐸's free appendages. As soon as 𝐾𝐻𝐸's quirk hit 𝐴𝐻𝐸's arm, it was shot off, causing blue blood to bleed out from 𝐴𝐻𝐸's blown open arm. He screamed in pain and turned towards 𝐾𝐻𝐸, who was breathing heavily, but grinning at the fact that he's finally battling someone, like what a true hero does. "Ha, you call yourself a criminal, yet you can't even see something as big as a blast hit your arm." He aimed his other hand towards 𝐴𝐻𝐸's other arm that was not being used. "Why you?" 𝐴𝐻𝐸 launched another appendage and another towards 𝐾𝐻𝐸, who jumped back into the water and looked at the two. "This will be easy." He shot another blast towards 𝐴𝐻𝐸's arm, blasting that open as well. Blood began to rain down at 𝐾𝐻𝐸 as the third appendage charged towards him. But 𝐾𝐻𝐸 easily grabbed it and shot into it, blowing it to pieces as well. 𝐴𝐻𝐸 screamed in pain, almost dropping Izuku, who screamed. 𝐾𝐻𝐸 turned, showing a slight bit of concern for Izuku in case he had fallen. He raised both of his arms, breathing heavily. Nearby, another unknown figure was watching, impressed by 𝐾𝐻𝐸's quirk. "That boy, he shows courage and strength. These two must be new around here. Leave us alone now," 𝐾𝐻𝐸 warned, ready to fire more blasts, this time into 𝐴𝐻𝐸's face. The octopus man clutched his bleeding arms in pain as Izuku looked on, impressed that 𝐾𝐻𝐸 had already mastered his quirk already. 𝐴𝐻𝐸 turned, growling, that is, until he noticed 𝐾𝐻𝐸's arms. They were throbbing, as if his quirk was putting a strain on them. 𝐾𝐻𝐸 could feel this too due to his expression looking like he was about to scream out in pain. His lower lip was also quivering. This caused 𝐴𝐻𝐸 to grin, as he felt his arms growing back. "HMPH, you seem to be strong, I like that." 𝐴𝐻𝐸 complimented 𝐾𝐻𝐸, who lowered his arms, dropping them into the lake to cool off. "Eh?" 𝐾𝐻𝐸 was confused. He slowly moved forward, which was a bad idea on his part. 𝐴𝐻𝐸 looked upwards again, before launching his appendages at 𝐾𝐻𝐸 again, as they have regrown. Before 𝐾𝐻𝐸 could react, the three appendages grabbed onto him and dragged him under the water, with 𝐴𝐻𝐸's intention to drown him. "Kakin!" Izuku cried as he tried to break free from the arm that was wrapped around his leg. He tried kicking and scratching it, but it's no use. 𝐴𝐻𝐸 stood there, watching as air bubbles began to appear from the water. He was waiting until they stopped shooting out from the water like a geyser. The man that was currently watching the events unfold gasped. "And no, he's going to die. But not for long." "You monster, let him go, he doesn't deserve to die," Izuku begged. "Please, don't kill him, take me instead. He doesn't deserve this," he pleaded, no matter how hard Izuku tries. 𝐴𝐻𝐸 wasn't listening to him. He simply turned and smirked. "Sorry kid, but the first thing you should learn about this zone, everyone will want you dead sooner or later." He taunted Izuku, who looked back at the lake. 𝐾𝐻𝐸 was in trouble. He couldn't break free. He's going to drown if Izuku doesn't do anything. He needs to break free and fast. 𝐾𝐻𝐸 needs to free. He can't die. He's Izuku's friend. He has to save him. As Izuku teared up, he saw the last air bubbles appear from the water. Before they stopped. "Nuo?" Izuku launched himself upwards and bit as hard as he could onto the appendage around his leg, causing 𝐴𝐻𝐸 to suddenly cry out in pain and launched the three appendages that he was using to drown 𝐾𝐻𝐸 out of the water and high into the air. "You bastard, I'm going to rip your head off," 𝐴𝐻𝐸 cried out. Izuku moved back, the arm around his leg letting go and causing him to fall. It began to bleed blue blood, which rained down on Izuku. similar to what it did to Katsuki a few minutes earlier. A bit of the skin was also on Izuku's mouth, which he pulled out and threw away as he continued to fall from the ground. He panicked, not sure how he was going to survive this. He covered his head, hoping something, anything, anyone, would save him so he can save Katsuki. If not, he was going to die, without saving Katsuki. Izuku suddenly felt himself stopping in midair, and he removed his arms from his face, realizing that he was looking down at the ground, as someone had stopped him from falling. "I'm safe?" Izuku was confused. Who could have saved him so easily? He looked up and saw him. The man that always smiles, the most well-known hero in the world. The supposed mastermind behind Quirk Mageddon. The symbol of peace, All Might, who placed on the ground and saluted him. "Hello, young boy, I see you're having a bad night." All Might sympathized with Izuku, who was at a loss for words. All Might. But he only stated his name. 𝐸𝐴𝐻 wasn't joyous to see that All Might had appeared. In fact, he was speechless by his sudden appearance. All Might. "But you can't be here?" 𝐸𝐴𝐻 took a few steps back, his 3 appendages falling towards Izuku and All Might, the latter of whom looked upwards, and punched one of 𝐸𝐴𝐻's appendages away from him and Izuku, before rushing towards 𝐸𝐴𝐻. "Missouri smash!" He yelled to the top of his lungs, bashing 𝐸𝐴𝐻 in the head with his fist as hard as he could, causing his head to start bleeding as well and launch him towards the boat he was on. He screamed as All Might turned towards Izuku. "Are you okay?" he asked, sounding worried. Izuku simply nodded, not finding the words to say to his idol. All Might raised his thumb. "That's great, don't worry. That octopus isn't going to hurt you now." He turned towards the boat. 𝐸𝐴𝐻 slowly stood up. "I'm going to make sure he's punished for drug smuggling." He launched himself forward towards the boat. Izuku looked at the lake, and realized that Katsuki was still in the water. Without wasting any time, Izuku ran forward and jumped into the water, as All Might and 𝐸𝐴𝐻 continued their fight. 𝐸𝐴𝐻 tried to fight back against the symbol of peace, as desperate as possible by launching his appendages at All Might, who simply grabbed all 4 of them and slammed him into the water behind him. "Sorry, 𝐸𝐴𝐻, but your drug smuggling days are over." "Oh, shit." 𝐸𝐴𝐻 realized that he was done for. He didn't want to go back to Tartarus again, especially with all of those guns, missiles, chainsaws, shadow realm portals, pointing down at him, ready to fire off the second he tried to move an inch. Izuku meanwhile pushed himself forward, and covered his breath so water doesn't go in him. He managed to see clearly underwater, and soon after jumping in, saw Katsuki lying at the bottom of the lake, knocked out from what 𝐸𝐴𝐻 was doing to him. Izuku pushed faster until he was near Katsuki. He held out his hands and grabbed onto Katsuki's, pulling him upwards towards Izuku's shoulder. He was heavy. So heavy in fact that Izuku briefly lost his balance and almost opened his mouth. But he kept calm and looked up towards the top of the lake. He heard someone screaming and the sound of a boat starting. He swam upwards by simply pushing himself, trying his best not to let go of Katsuki, who was not waking up, nor responding to anything that Izuku was doing. A few seconds later, Izuku and Katsuki rose from the lake and moved forward onto the land. Izuku fell, dropping Katsuki beside him as he breathed heavily. He looked at his classmate and was relieved to find that he was still breathing, but was not waking up. Just then, Izuku saw someone jumping over him and landing in front of him and Katsuki. He looked up to see that it was All Might, who looked down at the boys, still smiling as always. "𝐸𝐴𝐻 has been dealt with." He pointed behind Izuku, who turned and saw that 2 of 𝐸𝐴𝐻's arms were wrapped around the steering wheel of the boat. 𝐸𝐴𝐻 cried in sadness as the boat drove away from the lake. "WH, where is it going?" Izuku was still frightened after the fight just now, but All Might bent down to reassure him, the scared boy. "It's all right now. The boat strangely had an autopilot system despite being old. So I redirected it to a beach where a few pro heroes will come and get him in the morning, which is when he will get to the beach." All Might then looked at Katsuki, who was not waking up. Thank you." Izuku teared up, relieved that the fight was now over. All Might pointed at Katsuki. "Your friend, you saved him, but he's not waking up." All Might pointed up. Izuku turned and coughed. "Kaken, no, wake up." Izuku moved beside Katsuki, his voice breaking. He needed to wake up. "Please, wake up." Katsuki suddenly coughed water out of his mouth, and his eyes slowly began to open. Izuku and All Might were blurry to him, but he can notice their features. Ow. Katsuki tried to speak, but there was still water in his lungs. It was hard for him to speak. Or breath. He slowly turned to Izuku, and as his eyes got heavy, there was one last thing he coughed out. He grabbed onto Izuku's arm. Deku. Before closing his eyes. 𝐀𝐦, come on, wake up, pleaded Izuku as he began to perform CPR on Katsuki's unconscious body. It's been a few minutes since he had last opened his eyes, and his breath was slowing down. Izuku became even more frantic as he tried his best to revive his friend. But his many attempts to get Katsuki to wake up again were in vain, and Toshinori looked worried. He leaned down and grabbed Izuku by the shoulder. Young Midoriya, let me try. I can try and save young Bakugo, Toshinori requested, causing Izuku to tear up and stop before looking up at All Might. Please, save him, he begged as he stood out of Toshinori's way and watched as Toshinori sat down next to Katsuki and began to use CPR. He wanted to be gentle when trying to save Katsuki since he's worried that he could crush Katsuki's chest. Come on, wake up, you can do it. Toshinori started giving Katsuki chest compressions, but nothing was happening. He touched his neck to check his pulse, and his eyes widened in horror, but he still kept his smile. No. Toshinori shakes his head. He continued to give Katsuki chest compressions. Quick this time, since he's determined to save the boy's life. He can't let Izuku down. He can't let another person die in his watch. He already had to witness someone close to him die before. He wasn't going to let another innocent person die again. As he continued, Toshinori did all he could to get Katsuki to spit out more water again and open his eyes. Any signs of life will do. Anything. All Might, Izuku yelled, stopping Toshinori, who looked down. Katsuki still hasn't woken up. He was gone. Toshinori stood up and looked at Izuku, who began to tear up as he shook his head. He was already in denial over the fact that Katsuki may never wake up now. I'm sorry, young Midoriya. Toshinori stepped away. No. Izuku whimpered, his voice almost breaking as he crawled over to the corpse of Katsuki and began to clutch him. He shook his head as he began to cry, his tears falling onto Katsuki's lifeless body. Izuku couldn't say anything nor look at All Might. He was alone. He lost his friend, and now he was in the zone alone. Toshinori looked at Izuku and clenched his fists. He couldn't say Katsuki. It was happening again. He failed. You knew he was dead from the start. Toshinori looked up and saw a dark figure standing near Izuku and Katsuki. Izuku didn't seem to notice the figure, not even as he walked past him and towards All Might. He gasped, realizing who the figure was. He died, Toshinori. You failed to rescue him like when you failed to rescue me. You can't save anyone. You're always late to the rescue. The figure stopped. He sounded emotionless. Toshinori shook his head. No, I tried. I tried to save young Bakugo. Toshinori clenched his hands. He began to notice his surroundings begin to darken, and how Izuku and Katsuki began to vanish. He tried to reach for Izuku. Young Midoriya, look out! He tried to reach for Izuku, but he was already gone, as did the lifeless corpse of Katsuki. Now it was only Toshinori, alone, the figure having vanished, but his voice still remains. They're gone, Toshinori. Midoriya will resent you now, like everyone else, like I did. You don't deserve the title of the symbol of peace. Toshinori looked around, wondering what the voice was coming from now. Fumi-kun, please, I did all I could to reach you. I tried all I could to save everyone that week. Toshinori yelled, wanting to get out where he was now. But he knew that was going to be impossible. And yet you couldn't protect me from her. You couldn't protect those people from what was going to happen. You don't deserve to have the title of the symbol of peace when you let those men, women, and children die that week. And that boy you couldn't save. I bet his last thoughts were how nobody was going to save him and how scared he was of the afterlife. The voice taunted Toshinori. Toshinori fell to his knees. He didn't want to admit that the voice was right, but he knew in some way it was. I'm sorry. Toshinori teared up. A pair of feet stood near Toshinori, followed by another pair. One was dripping with water, the other with blood. All Might. The voice that was dripping with water spoke out. Toshinori realized that the voice was Katsuki. He was alive. Why did you let me die? He asked, sounding bitter in his voice. And sad, very sad. Toshinori looked up at the two that were looking down at him. The first was of Katsuki, who was wet from being in the lake for so long. He gave Toshinori a look that was disappointing. He wasn't angry, but dismal. The man standing beside him, sent shivers down Toshinori's spine when he realized who it was. He was wearing armor, the kind of armor found on knights in fairy tales. The armor was wet with blood and showed signs of assault. It's as if pairs of hands grabbed onto the armor and pulled bits and pieces off of the man. At the man's center was his exposed stomach, which the hands ripped open and pulled into by an unknown force. The man had scratches on his face. The scratches were deep and exposed some of the bones from within the man's cheeks. Toshinori can see that the man was trying his best to smile. It's as if he was trying to fight against the hatred he had for Toshinori, his old friend. But alas, he couldn't smile. He could never smile again, now that he was gone. The man pulled out something from behind him, a long lance, and raised it down to Toshinori. You failed to protect us, All Might. You failed to save them all. He pointed upwards, and from there, All Might could hear their voices. And it caused him to tear up. The man and Katsuki continued to stand there. They became quiet as Toshinori heard the voices of the victims that died in Quirk Mageddon. The victims were crying in their last moments alive. "Mommy, where are you? Please, I'm scared," cried out the voice of a young girl who had lost her mother for an unknown reason. "No. I can't. It hurts." The next voice was a man who got buried under some rubble and had his insides crushed, mere moments from death. "I'm sorry. Please. Help. I don't want to die." Was the sound of a boy who had lost both of his legs. Toshinori covered his face as the man raised his lance high in the air. "Please. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not saving them. I'm sorry for not being able to save young Bakugo." Toshinori begged, shaking in place. The man shook his head and gripped his lance. "Sorry won't do. You need an execution." He aimed his lance on Toshinori's neck, the tip touching his neck, and got Toshinori's attention. From his tearful eyes, he looked up to see that young Bakugo was gone, and only the man was standing there, with a vengeful look as if he wanted Toshinori dead for being unable to save him. "Goodbye, symbol of peace." And in no time at all, Toshinori's neck got cut into by the lance, before he could even react. His head moved off from his body and fell into the darkness of the ground around him, his vision turning to black. 28-5-25-11-14-15-23 Toshinori awoke in the bathroom of the Musatafu hospital. He had fallen asleep after washing his face. He looked at his hands and realized that he changed while he was asleep. He gripped his hands, but not too hard. His doctor advised him that if he did in this state, it could rip the skin off of his bones. Toshinori realized that the hiking he did in the Quirk zone these past few months kind of left him tired. He hasn't slept in a few days, and he didn't get in that many fights. Yet seeing Izuku and Katsuki in danger like that caused him to jump in and save the boys' lives. Izuku and Katsuki. Toshinori remembered taking them to this hospital. Katsuki still had water in his system thanks to 𝐸𝐸, and so he needed help. He remembered Izuku thanking him when he got there, and he left to wait in the waiting room. Katsuki got left in the care of the wonderful doctors and nurses at this facility. He then realized that he forgot to check on Izuku. He said he was only going to the bathroom to wash up after that fight with 𝐸𝐸. His fatigue must have taken a toll on him and caused him to fall asleep in the cubicle. This realization caused Toshinori to rub his chin in embarrassment. Izuku might be mad at him. Toshinori should leave now to check on Izuku and Katsuki. He didn't want to make the former angry at him for any longer for making him wait. Toshinori wondered if Izuku was still at the waiting room, if he leaves soon or left to find Katsuki. He seems to be close with Katsuki. But when they got to the hospital earlier today, Izuku confessed that he wasn't friends with the boy. In fact, he didn't even have a quirk, which shocked Toshinori. Yet, what he did to save his friend gave him an idea, and he realized that the boy has potential for something amazing. "Ooh, excuse me." Toshinori heard a knock from the cubicle that he was sitting in. He stood up, confused. "Ooh, yes, hello. I'm leaving this cubicle." Toshinori informed the man from behind the door, who sighed. "You didn't seem to be using the toilet at all. There's other people in this hospital that needs to use this bathroom too, not for sleeping," he pointed out. Toshinori looked confused, but before he could even ask how the man knew he spent a few hours sleeping in the bathroom, he answered for him. "And if you're going to ask, my quirk is X-ray vision. I can see what everyone is doing behind these doors," he revealed. Toshinori shivered as he thought on how the quirk could get used for something very, very weird. Toshinori left the cubicle soon after and looked at the mirrors in the bathroom. He washed his face before leaving. The man and a few others giving him odd stares at the state that he was in. But he ignored them and left to find Izuku. He also needed to find a way to stop having these nightmares. Nightmares of him. Izuku was sleeping in the waiting room. He was the only person in the room right now. A few others were in the room before him, like a shark man, and another man who had a problem where his allergies caused his quirk to go out of control. Izuku's tired. He spent most of the night trying to help Katsuki after that fight with 𝐸𝐸. Everything went so fast when he got him out of that lake. All Might delivered him and Katsuki to the hospital he was currently in by jumping high in the air. Well, he did have a powerful quirk that abused the laws of gravity after all. Even if poor Izuku had to be the victim of it, All Might told him to grab his arm, and when he jumped towards the hospital carrying Katsuki with his other arm, Izuku had felt his entire face about to peel off. Luckily, he was fine, albeit he threw up in a nearby water fountain, but he was fine. He went to sleep in the waiting room until he can get news about Katsuki's condition. As he dreamt, he was worried about what would happen with Katsuki. He's worried that he could die, and if he dies, Izuku will be alone in this zone. All Might will leave again as soon as he gets news about Katsuki, which means Izuku would have to fend for himself in this new place. Hey. Hey. He heard the voice of someone feminine in his sleep. He twitched his arm as Izuku moved to the side of the chair he was lying on, muttering in his sleep. No mom, don't put 𝐀𝐦 in the oven, it will burn up. Izuku muttered. Actually, I did that before. It only makes the salad warm and actually delicious. Although, it's dangerous. The girl advised Izuku in his sleep. He began to open his eyes, realizing that he was asleep for a few hours. But the first person that greeted him when woke up was a girl, who smiled. She had brown hair and blue eyes. She also appeared to be wearing a pink jacket and a gray skirt. She wore socks that were the kind that someone would wear around Halloween, as they had pumpkins on them. The girl seemed to be happy for someone, which made Izuku confused as he sat up and rubbed his eyes. Hey, you seem to be sleeping here like some hobo trying to find a place to sleep. Good thing poverty's no longer a problem here in Japan. The girl sounded contented. Izuku smiled. Ooh, hi, sorry if I took up those seats so I can lie down. Izuku realized that his legs were still lying on a few seats, and he looked embarrassed. He moved his legs away as he allowed the girl to sit beside him while he sat forward. Thanks, I was going to ask, but thanks for doing it for me. The girl turned to Izuku smiling again as she played with her hair. She wanted to continue the conversation, but Izuku looked worried about something. She guessed that it must be the reason that he was at the hospital. So, why are you here? You here for an operation or something? The girl realized that she shouldn't have asked this topic to a very worried visitor at this hospital. Izuku turned and laughed as he twiddled his hands. Oh no, it's not for me, but for a classmate of mine, Izuku revealed. He felt as though the girl, along with this entire hospital, seemed to be safe enough for him to reveal why he was here. Something bad happened to him last night and me and a friend of mine arrived here so he can get help. Izuku played with the side of his hair, since the girl was doing it. The girl's smile then turned into a frown. I'm still waiting for news about his recovery. I'm not even sure if the doctors or nurses have noticed me yet. Izuku looked at the front desk, looking worried again. The girl looked touched about how Izuku was waiting this long for Katsuki. That's so sad. I'm sorry that your friend has to go through that. The girl sympathized, which surprised Izuku. He didn't know that much people who sympathized with his problems. The only other people who do don't even know he's in the quirk zone, not yet at least. You do? Izuku expressed his surprised reaction. The girl looked confused. Sorry, it's that. I don't know that many people that feel bad about me, or my classmate. Izuku lamented, but the girl smiled again. Well now I'm the newest person that feels bad for you. Boy who's around my same age, and my boyfriend too when he gets back. The girl patted Izuku on the head, which made Izuku relax. Despite only meeting this girl, and not even knowing her name yet, he felt her reassurance and knew that things were going to be okay. He should stop worrying. He turned towards the girl again, his smile extending. Thanks. I'm Midoriya Izuku by the way. I arrived to this zone yesterday. He offered to shake the girl's hand, which she did. Ito Hanaka. I just came to this hospital because my boyfriend Aishin had an accident with his quirk. Although it's not as bad as well. Hanaka didn't want to mention Izuku's classmate right now. Not until she knows that he was going to be alright. She changed the subject. Anyway, you recently arrived, huh? That explains why you're twitchy. Hanaka noticed that Izuku's hands were twitching in fear. Izuku tried to hide them and laughed when he realized this. Me? Oh no. He hid his hands from behind his back, away from Hanaka, who patted Izuku on the back. It's fine. I met tons of students at my junior high school who have that same fear as you, Midoriya-san. They freaked out because they heard that the Quirk Zone was some sort of place for Quirk people to die in. Hanaka then pointed to around the hospital. But as you can see, everything is as normal as the quirkless side of Japan, except for the fact that everyone here has a quirk, like you. Hanaka poked Izuku, not knowing the irony about Izuku. Izuku felt his face turning purple. He was at least relieved that the Quirk Zone appears to be a great place, so far. The next question Hanaka asked caused him to gulp. So, what is your quirk? Mine's is my hands turning into bear claw, see? Hanaka lifted both of her hands and Izuku watched, as they morphed into the hands found on bears. Whoa! Was what he could only say as he looked up to Hanaka, trying to come up with a way of saying that he doesn't have a quirk, and that he was brought to the zone mistakenly. Well, you see, Ito-san. As Izuku tried his best to explain to Hanaka about being quirkless, another voice filled the waiting room. Hana-chan, I'm back. Izuku and Hanaka turned, with the latter standing up and waving. At the end of the room was a boy with a black shirt and a green jacket. He was also wearing brown pants and had blonde hair and green eyes. He and Hanaka ran up to each other and hugged, while Izuku looked on. Smiling for the couple, the boy took notice of Izuku and waved at him. Hi, do you want to join our hug? He asked Izuku, who looked surprised, but turned down the boy's kind offer. Ooh, no thanks. I'm Midoriya, by the way. Midoriya Izuku. I was talking to your girlfriend here. He pointed to Hanaka. Oh, I see. The boy stopped hugging Hanaka and walked up to Izuku, who was clutching his hands. He was a bit worried about what might happen to him soon. Are you trying to take away Hanaka from me? He asked, which brought Izuku's attention and caused him to blush. What? No, of course not. I don't even know much about your girlfriend. Izuku shakes his hands, trying to reassure the boy, who laughed and patted Izuku on the back. Relax, I was only joking. I always ask this to any boy Hanaka-chan talks to. Aishin reassured Izuku. Hanaka walked up to the boys. I do the same to any boy that talks to Aishin-kun, but we're inseparable. Hanaka then clung to Aishin to show how close they were to each other, which Izuku felt. He was happy with seeing such a joyous couple after what happened to him and Katsuki last night. He wondered if he was going to meet someone like that in his life, although he feels as though that won't be possible. He feels as though that there will never be someone that will love him like how Aishin and Hanaka love each other. It's making him upset now when he thinks about it, and his thoughts about love stopped when Aishin tickled at his neck. So, my neck's feeling fine now. He looked at Hanaka, who clapped her hands. That's wonderful, Aishin-kun. Don't strain your voice again in time for the entrance exam. Hanaka warned her boyfriend. Entrance exam. Izuku remembered hearing before. It was a popular school during the golden age of heroes. Tons of heroes have attended the school and became successful because of it. But alas, when 𝐴𝐿 took control and created the Quirk Wall, talks about died down a lot. So it surprised Izuku when he heard that it was still open, and that there's going to be an entrance exam. Too bad he was quirkless. Then again, they used to have a rule where quirkless heroes can enter if they're skilled enough, such as members of the Valkyrie family. Aishin and Hanaka turned their gazes back to Izuku. Oh, why yes, every 12 months, hosts an entrance exam for all the fresh new quirks that people like us have. If we pass, we'll be attending the hero course where me and my girlfriend will one day become heroes. Aishin boasted, Hanaka looking excited. We've been training since the exam is going to be in 12 months. Speaking of which, are you going to join Midoriya-kun? She asked. Izuku looked conflicted. He wasn't sure how he was going to answer that, or Hanaka's question about his quirk, which again, he doesn't have. His worries stopped when a nurse entered the waiting room. Excuse me, which one of you is Midoriya Izuku? She read out a checkboard she was holding, causing Izuku to stand up. Oh, I am. Is this about Kaken? Is he okay? Izuku asked the nurse, who looked joyful. Yes, he got brought out a few hours ago. He's currently recovering. The good news, and only good news, is that we managed to get water out of his system before it could do any lifetime damage. She patted Izuku on the shoulder. so it's going to be okay. Your friend isn't going to die or become comatose. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing that. Now he needed to see Katsuki and be sure he was going to do fine. Visiting hours have opened so you can go and see him if you like. He's in room 578. The nurse informed Izuku. Thank you. He bowed before watching the nurse leave the waiting room to continue her job. He then turned to Aishun and Hanaka, who were also relieved that Katsuki was fine despite not meeting him. Thanks for your support, you two. I hope we meet again in the future. I have to go and see 𝐀𝐦 now, but good luck with the entrance exam. He waved his hands at the couple. I'm guessing 𝐀𝐦 is the boy you're worried about, Hanaka asked. Izuku nodded as Hanaka smiled again, after looking odd at Izuku. Well, we're glad that he's fine, Midoriya-kun. We should get going and continue our training for the exam in 12 months, Hana-chan. Aishun informed Hanaka, who nodded. Izuku left before them. With the couple waving him goodbye, they sounded spooky. Goodbye. They spoke in a spooky tone, as Izuku walked down the halls further down the hospital and towards room 578. Along the way, Izuku received word about the town he was in through gossip. It appears that Izuku was in a town called Musatafu. While looking through the crowd, Izuku wanted to see if All Might was around. He would pretty much stand out from anyone in the hospital. But so far, he couldn't see him. He did say he was going to the bathroom in the hospital, but he appeared to be taking a long time to do so. Izuku hoped that he didn't actually up and left. He wanted to thank the symbol of peace, as he didn't have the time to thank him for yesterday. Izuku continued his way towards room 578 and soon reached the door, where he heard the sound of someone munching and chowing down on something from the other side of the room. Izuku raised his hand and knocked on it. What? A large booming voice shouted out from the door. Izuku looked relieved for once to hear Katsuki yell. If that's the fucking nurse again, I won't hesitate to throw this fucking bowl at you again. I don't need another examination. Katsuki began his rant, but Izuku interrupted him. 𝐀𝐦, it's me. I came here to check, are you still in my life? Go away, Deku. Katsuki interrupted Izuku before he could finish, as revenge for interrupting him first. Izuku didn't want to leave, as he still wanted to see Katsuki. I wanted to come for a quick visit if it's okay, he pleaded, causing a long sigh to escape in room 578. Katsuki didn't say anything else. Izuku thought that his silence meant he could enter and see Katsuki, although when he entered, he looked annoyed to find that Katsuki had closed his eyes. The bowls that he got from a nurse were empty as well, so he wouldn't give anything to Izuku. Izuku wasn't going to intend to sit down in the room. So, are you okay, 𝐀𝐦? I wanted to check seeing as how you almost drowned by that octopus guy last night. Izuku asked. He wasn't expecting Katsuki to answer since he'll likely ignore his questions. To Izuku's surprise, he did reply. I'm not dead, aren't I? He snapped back, grinning in anger every minute that Izuku was in the room. Izuku knew that Katsuki didn't want him to be in the room any longer and was intending to leave. Before he did leave, he wanted to ask Katsuki another question. 𝐀𝐦, about your fam, I already got a call from my mom. Katsuki turned away. Izuku perked up in surprise. You did? He wished for more from Katsuki's statement, as the boy in the bed opened his eyes and looked at the window. Yeah, she said she knows that I'm in the Quirk zone, because those fucking officers tracked her and my dad down. They're coming here as well, at least I have people to stay with. Katsuki looked at the corner of his eye, near the door where Izuku was standing. Unlike you, Deku, you can go hang around in a ditch for all I care. I swear to God we're not going to be in the same class at our new school. Katsuki looked back at the window soon after. Izuku looked down, feeling dismal. 𝐀𝐦, I'm sorry. He apologized, catching Katsuki's attention. I'm sorry for getting in your way most of the time. I want to be proud of you for being kind, and now for having an amazing quirk. I didn't mean to hurt you in the past. I guess being here is some sort of punishment for me. Izuku lamented. Katsuki didn't look back, although his expression was a surprise. He looked surprised that someone like Deku would say something like that. Alas, the buzzing of Izuku's phone going off interrupted the two. Izuku looked shocked that he still had his phone. It seems that the Quirk officers didn't take it away from him. He took it out of his pocket and opened the door to the room. As he did, he looked back at Katsuki. I'll go take just go Deku. Katsuki finished his sentence for Izuku, who left without another word. Once Izuku closed the door, Katsuki turned to make sure he was gone. He gave a look of sadness at Izuku once he was gone, feeling the loneliness that Izuku was having. Katsuki thought this was his true punishment, that he would feel the same way as Deku, the person he hates the most. Izuku stood outside the room, looking down at his phone to see who it was that was calling him. The theme of an anime based off of All Might played from his phone as a ringtone. He was expecting the caller to be his mother. Instead, the caller was Miyoko. That was when Izuku remembered what today was. Oh no, today was the anniversary of our playdate, Mio-chan. We're never going to be able to do this ever again. Izuku took a deep breath, and without any more delays, he answered his phone call before it went to voicemail. Miyoko-chan. Izuku took a few steps away from the door, as he soon heard the voice of his other childhood friend from his phone. Izuku-kun, are you okay? Are you hurt? I went over to your house and your mother. She was so upset and crying her eyes out. There were officers everywhere that said you went to the Quirk zone. Is it true? Miyoko had worry in her tone of voice, which caused Izuku's grip on his phone to loosen. He took a deep breath. I'm sorry, Mio-chan. Something bad happened yesterday when you left. Bakugo got attacked, and I jumped in to try and save him. We were both taken to the zone. He explained to Miyoko. She was gasping from the other line. She took a deep breath. Judging from her reaction, she's scared. Scared that her two closest friends might suffer in the Quirk zone. Since she was talking to one of them, she was at least relieved that Izuku was okay. But she was still worried. Are you okay? I don't know what to say. My ears are ringing right now. Miyoko's voice was shaking in fear, as was Izuku's when he replied. We're at the hospital. He began to tear up. Bakugo was attacked again by someone last night. He's doing okay. But Miyoko-chan. Izuku didn't want to say it. He didn't want to say that he wasn't going to see Miyoko again, or his mother. There was still Quirk Day. But Izuku didn't want to spend a day with his mother and best friend. He wanted to spend time with them, whenever he wanted without anyone preventing him so. We won't see each other ever again. He finally managed to spit it out, covering his hand to try and calm himself down. He moved away from Katsuki's door, as he heard the sound of coughing coming from the other line. They didn't take you back when they realize you don't have a quirk. Miyoko was having trouble speaking herself, but she kept calm, as did Izuku currently. Yes, they did a blood test, but they threw into this zone anyway because of something in my blood. He finished explaining to Miyoko, who was at a loss of words. Miyoko's whimpers rang from the other line, which caused tears to finally shed from Izuku. His feet began to wobble as he tried to balance himself. It would have been worse if he was talking to his mom, but he can't. He can't talk to his mom right now. He's trying to keep himself together when talking to Miyoko. There was silence on each side of the phone for a few minutes, but once they passed, Miyoko broke the silence. I'm sorry, Izuku-kun, I need some time alone. I need to go see your mom. She can't be alone on this. She spoke in a soft tone. I understand. Tell my mom that I will always love her. Izuku asked Miyoko. I will. How is Katsuki-kun doing now? Miyoko felt calm, and so did Izuku. He's recovering. Izuku didn't want to say that Katsuki had almost drowned. Miyoko was still reacting to the fact that she won't be able to see her friends again. That's good. So, is this goodbye, Izuku-kun? Izuku smiled. It's never goodbye. We will see each other again no matter what. We still have our phones and our disharmony accounts. We will find a way to see each other in person again, me and Katsuki and you. Izuku told his friend, who laughed. It will happen, Izuku-kun. We will see each other again. You'll be back with your mom, and we'll hang around again like we always do. Miyoko promised. A few minutes later, the two hung up and Izuku wiped away his tears, realizing that he was alone in the hallway he was in. Once more he was alone. He looked down at his lap and sighed, putting his phone away. If All Might did leave, then Izuku wasn't sure what he was going to do next. He had nowhere to go. Nobody knows him in this zone except for Aishin and Hanaka, and Izuku had only met the couple. He doesn't even have their phone numbers or address. Even if he did, would they even allow him to stay with them until he got back on his feet? Especially if they find out that he doesn't have a quirk. Young Midoriya cried out a cheerful voice as a small thing shadow covered Izuku. He turned and saw a fragile-looking figure standing in front of Izuku, with a frown on his face and looking deathly thin. His appearance frightened Izuku and caused him to jump. It didn't help that this man had the voice of All Might for some reason. Wah! Izuku yelped out loud, almost falling on the floor. "Shut the fuck up out there, I'm trying to sleep," cried the annoyed voice of Katsuki from his room nearby. Toshinori knew that his current appearance was going to make Izuku unnerved. I know, my appearance can be creepy. Even my old friends were uncomfortable when they first saw me in this state." Toshinori joked, which Izuku soon realized, that this man was All Might, albeit in a more weak form, a very weak form. All Might? Izuku took a few steps forward to get a closer look at Toshinori. "This is you? How can you turn into a different form like that? Did a villain do this to you?" Izuku asked, before looking away, realizing that question was a bit too personal for All Might. "I'm sorry if that question was personal." Izuku bowed. Toshinori shrugged. "It's fine. People always ask me this when they find out the truth about my real appearance." "Midoriya, I need to tell you the truth," Toshinori announced, which surprised Izuku, who turned back towards Toshinori. "But we only met each other last night. I don't even know your real name." Toshinori smiled at Izuku's concerns. He was glad that Izuku was feeling like this, which gave him more of a reason that he should be ready. Ready to be the next person to inherit it. I was thinking so too. But what you did last night, how far you went to save that classmate of yours. That was the sign of something special, young Midoriya. Tell me." Toshinori began to ask a question to Izuku as he moved forward. Izuku began to follow him towards the exit of the hospital. "That determination, how you jumped to the call for that Bakugo boy. Do you do that to everyone that needs help? Such as other friends in your life?" Toshinori's question made Izuku think. He never did try to rescue anyone before, except for his first playdate with Miyoko. But even then she would have gotten through that tunnel herself had Izuku didn't do anything. But Katsuki, when he almost drowned in the lake. That was the first time Izuku had ever rescued someone's life before. Even before, when he got attacked by the Quirk patrol officers. Izuku wanted to make sure he was all right. He wants to make sure all his small group of friends are okay, and his mother. After all, they were the only people Izuku has in this world, and he would do anything to make sure that they're safe. Anyone would if they got placed in a life-threatening situation. So he smiled and nodded at Toshinori, who noticed. "Yes, I would. I want to protect everyone I know, like what a hero does, All Might, like what you do." Izuku clenched his fist. Toshinori was proud despite not knowing that much of Izuku. But he can tell that the boy had some good morals. The two walked away from the hospital, so Toshinori could tell Izuku about his offer away from people. As they were leaving, Toshinori thought about Innsmouth, and if he had made it to his destination by now. It should be around the time he would get to the beach. It was a warm day despite the early spring weather. Either way, people went to the beach on this Sunday, so they can relax before going back to work and school tomorrow. As the citizens chat and sit on blankets, so the sand doesn't touch their skin. Children played around the beach and are enjoying the time of their lives. Two heroes got assigned to wait for a person to arrive at the beach so they can arrest him, and were not having fun. The pro heroes' names were 𝐴𝐻𝐸 and 𝐀𝐦, while 𝐴𝐻𝐸 was a veteran pro hero, having graduated from a decade ago following Quirk Mageddon. 𝐀𝐦, or Shinji Nishia, when he's out of his suit, was new in the pro hero agency, and this was his second mission. He looked relieved since it seems that the mission was going to be simple. Although, he was getting bored with all this waiting around for the man they were planning to detain. "I don't get it. Isn't All Might supposed to be delivering the guy as well?" 𝐀𝐦 questioned 𝐴𝐻𝐸. 𝐴𝐻𝐸 was focusing on looking out from the ocean for any octopus men or boats that were moving towards the beach. 𝐀𝐦 realized that 𝐴𝐻𝐸 wasn't listening to him, so he decided to ask another question. "Speaking of which, how much do you know All Might?" 𝐀𝐦 gushed before apologizing. "I'm sorry. I'm kind of a fan of All Might, and I wanted to see what some of the people that worked with him thought about him. I heard he's a great guy to be around and is super optimistic." He gushed again. 𝐴𝐻𝐸, while annoyed at 𝐀𝐻𝐦's attitude, should be at least nice to him instead of ignoring his partner. "He's all right, although he's not the sort of guy that you should not get stuck in an elevator with." 𝐴𝐻𝐸 spoke of his opinion, before growling. "Or else his optimism will get on my nerves." He clenched his teeth. He then noticed something afar. "Wait, look." He got 𝐀𝐻𝐦's attention, and together the men looked out from the ocean. They saw that a boat was speeding its way towards the beach. Upon noticing how suspicious that the boat was acting, 𝐴𝐻𝐸 looked at 𝐀𝐻𝐦. "That must be Innsmouth, let's go." He informed his partner, who raised his thumb. "Right." he shouted before following beside 𝐴𝐻𝐿 to the spot at the beach where the boat was going to park. Once it did, 𝐸𝐴𝐻 yelped as he removed his appendages off the steering wheel. He groaned as he jumped off from the boat, as people gathered around to look at the octopus man. 𝐴𝐻𝐿 and 𝐀𝐦 jumped in front of them and prepared to take 𝐸𝐴𝐻 into custody before he could move. I guess All Might delivered, wherever he might be. 𝐴𝐻𝐿 looked around, while 𝐀𝐦 took out a sword and pointed it to 𝐸𝐴𝐻. 𝐸𝐴𝐻, is it? You need to come with us as you're under arrest for drug smuggling. 𝐀𝐦 demanded, only for 𝐸𝐴𝐻 to laugh at the pro hero. Ha, as if you'll catch me, 𝐸𝐴𝐻 yelled before he tried to use his arms. But because they got tied to the steering wheel, they got sore and fell to the ground as 𝐸𝐴𝐻 screamed in pain. 𝐀𝐦 wanted to use his quirk by now, but there wasn't any signs of wood anywhere. You who? Sang the voice of a woman as the three men and everyone else at the beach watched the arrival of yet another pro hero. She was also here to capture 𝐸𝐴𝐻. She was a blonde woman in a purple and white suit. Judging by 𝐀𝐦 and 𝐴𝐻𝐿's confused expressions, the woman seemed to be a new pro hero as well. And you are? 𝐀𝐦 asked as the woman smiled at him. Oh, I see we haven't met. 𝐀𝐦, otherwise known as Mount Lady. She bowed to introduce herself to the two men. 𝐴𝐻𝐿 didn't seem to care. Like we know your pro hero nickname, until now. What do you the heroes talk ceased when 𝐸𝐴𝐻 managed to grab Mount Lady's arm with one of his less sore arms. Aha, got you now. 𝐸𝐻 laughed as he tried to drag 𝐬𝐬 closer. But she wasn't moving. Instead she looked annoyed. Ugh, can't you wait until we finish before I drag your ugly octopus ass to Tartarus where you belong? Mount Lady sounded annoyed. She decided that it was time she used her quirk. Stand back, she warned everyone, before she started to grow. She continued to grow until she was the same size as a mountain, hence her hero nickname. 𝐸𝐴�'s appendage moved away when she grew gigantic. She looked down and flickered 𝐸𝐴� on his boat before grabbing onto it. 𝐸𝐴� began to panic as Mount Lady looked down at 𝐴𝐻𝐿 and 𝐀𝐦. They got impressed by the woman's quirk. Sorry boys, but looks like I'm going to be the one to finish the mission. I can take you back to the hero HQ, and who knows, I'll mention you when I get interviewed for what I did right now later today. She smiled at the two. I guess she wants attention. 𝐴𝐻𝐿 sighed. 𝐀𝐦 was more kinder and jumped on the boat. 𝐴𝐻𝐿, not wanting to go back to the HQ alone, decided to join his partner of the mission. Thank you, Mount Lady. 𝐀𝐦 kindly spoke as Mount Lady began her short walk to Tartarus with 𝐴𝐻𝐿, 𝐀𝐦 and 𝐸𝐴𝐻 in tow. During the walk, 𝐴𝐻𝐿 and 𝐀𝐦 tried to make sure 𝐸𝐴𝐻 didn't do anything funny. They also took the time to check his boat to confirm that he was smuggling cocaine. They soon proved right when they managed to find a boatload stash at the boat storage. 𝐸𝐴� tried at least one more attempt to escape as he bit one of 𝐬�'s finger. She didn't even flinch nor feel it, and he realized that his fate sealed in this zone. And it was all thanks to that wretched All Might. Toshinori turned back towards Izuku, who was standing near the hospital, looking depressed. Toshinori was curious as Izuku didn't look dismal when the two left the hospital. Is something the matter, young Midoriya? You look upset, and I want to make sure you're in the right mood before I tell you my offer. Toshinori asked. Izuku noticed and perked up. Sorry, All Might? It's that. I had a talk with a friend of mine, who I won't see again since she, along with my mother, is at the other side of Japan. He revealed. Toshinori, feeling sorry for Izuku, wanted to reassure him. He walked over to Izuku. When he was in front of the boy who was now almost his size, he did his hardest to lift up his arm and landed on Izuku's shoulder as a sign of comfort. Young Midoriya, you will see them again. There are going to be obstacles in your life. But with your determination and optimism, you'll get past them and see the ones you love again. Don't worry. Toshinori wanted to smile, but he couldn't as it will damage his cheekbones. You're not alone. He finished as Izuku perked up and nodded. Toshinori's arm slid off from Izuku's shoulder, and he looked up at the sky. It's about time. Toshinori nodded. Izuku became confused. Time for what, All Might? To tell me about the offer? Izuku wondered. Then, Toshinori raised his arm again. A cloud of smoke covered him and blasted towards Izuku. He yelped and covered his mouth from the approaching smoke. After Izuku finished coughing and the smoke cleared, All Might stood before Izuku. He was in his more well-known muscular form. He looked down at Izuku. Yes, young Midoriya, I will now tell you about my offer, he yelled to the top of his lungs. knowing full well that nobody was going to be around the hospital since it was a Sunday. Everyone else that could be around was in the hospital itself. He then looked down. Izuku stared on in wonder. In the back of his mind, he was gushing like the fanboy he was. But he knew right now was a serious moment. And soon for him, it was going to be life-changing. All Might pointed a finger down at Izuku before he turned it into a hand, offering Izuku to grab onto it. Young Midoriya, from what I have seen of you last night, how you were bit in Smith's arm, fall to great heights and swim underwater to save the people you care about. That is a sign of being a true hero. Because of that, I have decided. You should be the one to have my quirk, all for one, and attend you. He revealed to Izuku, who got taken aback. Me? But I don't even have a quirk. He lamented, but All Might didn't care. I don't care. He stated the obvious. You could get one by having my quirk, or I can take you back to the other side of Japan. You will reunite with your mother and your friend again, and you can live a normal and peaceful life with them. He finished his offer. Now he needed to wait for Izuku's answer. It's your choice, of course. I will respect your decision either way. He stood there, waiting, as Izuku thought about the offer. On one hand, he can have a quirk and begin to live out his dream as a hero. He could become like All Might and Bakugo and fulfill his dream. But he's not going to see his mother or Miyako again, especially when he inherits All Might's quirk. He'll have a quirk like everyone else in the zone. He thought back about how those two wanted Izuku's dream to come true, and how they supported him throughout the years. If they found out about the offer, they would be proud for him, on how he was going to achieve his dream of becoming a hero. Izuku grabbed All Might's hand. All Might. He looked up, tears welling up in his eyes, as All Might held his breath, waiting for Izuku to make his choice. I will become a hero. The two smiled, as Izuku's apprenticeship with his new mentor All Might had begun.